The morning broke hot and white. A wind, already tired by 9 o'clock, stirred the red dust on the prairie, lifting it in lazy spirals that tasted like grit and ancient loss. The buffalo grass was brittle, bleached to the color of old bone. He rode through this emptiness, a young Comanche man on a stallion as black as a night without stars. He rode bareback, gripping the horse not with a saddle but with his legs and a balance born from a lifetime of moving as one creature. The horse's muscles worked beneath him, a fluid power that felt like his own. His name was Yiska, which meant night becomes day in the tongue of his people. He was perhaps 24 or 25 winters old, but his eyes held a stillness that made him seem older. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much darkness and was still waiting, with a hunter's patience, for the promised day. They were wild eyes. Yes, but they were also sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. Not the flick of a lizard's tail in the rocks, nor the distant, circling hawk that meant a different kind of death. He was a warrior, but this was not a war party. This was a journey of desperation. His people, what was left of them, had been pushed onto the strip of land the white government called a reservation. It was land the earth itself had forgotten, choked with salt cedar and rock, where the game was scarce and the streams ran thin. The children's bellies were swollen with hunger, and the old ones coughed a dry, racking sound in the pre-dawn chill. The government agent had promised grain. There was always a promise. But the grain, when it came at all, was always late. It was often short, the sacks half empty, or rotten from mold. The agents grew fat while the people grew thin. So Yiska had been sent by the chief, a man whose own face looked like a map of sorrow. He was sent to the white town of Red Rock. Slung across his horse were the last of the good winter pelts and 3 dry, stiff bison hides. He was to trade them for grain, not for the people, not directly. The pride of the Comanche would not allow them to beg for their own food. He was to trade for grain for the horses, the few good ones they had left, and perhaps some for his own family, for his sister's small children. His mission was simple, keep his people alive, but beneath that, running deeper than any river, was the second mission: do not lose what it means to be Comanche. Do not lose their honor in the dust of a white man's street. He rode with ghosts. 10 years ago, a lifetime ago, his world had ended. He remembered the smell of whiskey and burning leather. A war party of white men, not soldiers in blue coats, but a ragged mix of hunters and mercenaries, had fallen on their winter camp. They were led by a man whose name was spat like poison Graham Pike. They had come at dawn, firing into the lodges. Yiska, then just a boy, had watched his father emerge, rifle in hand, only to be cut down by a volley of shots, his body jerking before he fell. The memory was a sharp stone in Yiska's gut. He had only survived because of his mother. As the screaming and gunfire echoed, she had dragged him from the lodge, hidden him, and then herself, in a deep washout at the edge of the camp just as a sudden, violent sandstorm roared down from the north. They had huddled there, the world turning to roaring, stinging grit, while the men outside finished their work. His mother was gone now, too, taken by the white man's coughing sickness 2 winters past. But the memory of his father's blood on the snow, and the name Graham Pike, remained. It left Yiska with a cold hatred, but also a profound weariness. He was tired of war. He was tired of death. He was caught between the warrior's path of vengeance and the leader's burden of finding a new way to live for his people. Red Rock appeared first as a smudge of smoke, then as a raw scar on the land. It was a town built of desperation, just like the reservation. Its main street was nothing more than a wide gash of the same red dirt that covered everything. On either side stood false-fronted buildings of raw, unpainted wood, a saloon with swinging doors that never seemed to rest, a general store, a blacksmith's forge that rang with the flat sound of hammer on steel, and a small, hopeful wooden church with a crooked steeple. The town was loud. It was filled with the men who came to chip away at the edges of the world cowboys with jangling spurs. sun-scorched traders, bison hunters reeking of animal death, and discharged soldiers who had found no peace in peace. The air was a thick soup of smells: whiskey, gunpowder, stale sweat, and cooking fat. Yiska knew this place. He knew that a man of the people was not welcome here. He was, at best, a curiosity. At worst, he was a target. He would be watched, a stranger in a land that had been his grandfather's. He kept his face impassive, his back straight. He would show no fear. He would show nothing. He was not the only one in this town held captive by his past. She lived just outside it, in a place the town tried to ignore. Her name was Ada McKenna. She was a white woman, perhaps 28 years old, though a hard life had drawn faint lines around her eyes and mouth. She had brown hair, pulled back tightly from her face, and she wore a dress of plain, faded cotton. But there was nothing faded about the way she held herself. Her back was straight, her chin high. When she looked at you, her eyes were sharp, but shadowed by a deep, settled sadness. She lived on a small, struggling ranch that crouched against the low hills. It was not much a small wooden house that needed paint, a leaning barn, and a patch of dry earth she tried to wrestle into a garden. She was not alone there. She had a son, a boy of 7 named Jamie. Her husband was Elias McKenna. He had been dead for just over a year. Elias had been a man who matched the harshness of the land. He was known as an Indian hunter, a man who would join any party, like Graham Pike's, for the price of a bottle and the thrill of the chase. He was a hired gun when the hunting was slow. He was, by all accounts, a hard man, given to drink and to fits of rage. His death had been sudden and strange. He had supposedly fallen from a narrow pass in the rocks while hunting, his body not found for 2 days. But Red Rock had its own stories. The town whispered. The whispers said that Ada McKenna had grown tired of the beatings, tired of the drunken rages, tired of the blood he brought home on his hands. The whispers said she had poisoned him, put something in his whiskey, they said, and watched him ride out that last morning, knowing he would not come back. There was no proof. The sheriff had asked his questions and closed his book. But in a town like Red Rock, rumor was stronger than truth. It was a way to punish a woman who did not weep enough at her husband's grave. A woman who held her head too high. She was branded. She was the poison widow. She was bad luck. A woman who brought ruin to any man foolish enough to get close to her. She was as much an outcast as Yiska, just in a different way. And there was another man who watched her, a man who held the town in his fist. His name was Logan Pike. He was a large man, a landowner who dressed in dark suits that seemed out of place in the dust. He had been Elias McKenna's former partner in some land deal, and he now controlled most of the good grazing land, most of the cattle, and, most importantly, most of the water around Red Rock. He owned the bank, he owned the saloon, and he had the sheriff in his pocket. And he carried that name, Pike. He was related to the butcher of Yiska's camp. Graham Pike was his older brother, a fact Logan Pike was neither proud nor ashamed of. It was simply a tool, another piece of his family's reputation for getting what they wanted. What Logan Pike wanted now was Ada McKenna's small, failing ranch. It was not for the land itself, which was poor. It was for the deep, clear spring that bubbled up behind her house, the best water source in the county. And it was because the surveyors, riding through 2 months before, had driven stakes that marked the future path of the railroad, a path that ran directly through her property. So the pieces were set. Even before Yiska rode his black stallion onto that red street, the town held its breath, waiting. Yiska could feel the eyes on him as he dismounted. He felt the sudden silence from the men lounging on the boardwalk, the way their conversations stopped, the way their hands drifted, casual-like, to the pistols on their hips. He ignored them. He tied his horse to the hitching rail in front of the general store, patting the stallion's damp neck. He took the bundled furs under his arm. He could smell the dust, the sharp tang of his own horse's sweat, and underneath it all, the faint, sour smell of the white man's world. He could hear the tinny piano from the saloon and the heavy thud of his own moccasins on the wooden planks. He was a man walking into a cage, driven by the hunger of his people. Ada McKenna was a woman trapped in her own cage, built of rumors and a dead man's cruelty. And Logan Pike was a man who believed he owned both the cage and the key. The spirit of this West was freedom. It was the vast sky, the wind in the grass, the power of a horse running flat out. But it was also blood, it was also tears, and it was about to test them all. Yiska pushed the door open to Judd Morrison's general store. A small bell tinkled, a cheerful, stupid sound that was immediately swallowed by the silence. If the street had been watching him, the store felt him. The air, thick with the smell of ground coffee, cured tobacco, and oiled leather, went still. Two men playing checkers on a pickle barrel froze, their hands hovering. A woman in a gray bonnet, who had been inspecting a bolt of calico, pulled her shawl tighter and moved away from the aisle. And then there was Judd Morrison himself. He stood behind a long counter of scarred pine, a small man with a bald head and a clean, white apron that looked ridiculous in the dusty room. He had been weighing out beans, but he stopped, the metal scoop poised in his hand. His eyes, small and quick, flicked from Yiska's moccasins to the faint traces of ochre paint on his cheekbones, and finally to the bundle of furs under his arm. The look was not just unfriendly, it was calculating, assessing the value of the furs against the trouble of the man carrying them. Yiska walked to the counter. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that was unnerving in a room full of men who stomped and shuffled. He placed his bundle on the wood, the furs soft against the rough planking. "I need 3 bags of grain," Yiska said. His English was clear, learned from traders and the agents on the reservation, but it carried the rhythm of his own tongue, the words spoken with care. "For the horses." He pushed the furs forward. "And this." He untied a small leather pouch from his belt and let 3 silver dollars, heavy and worn, drop onto the counter. They made a solid, definite sound. Morrison's eyes stayed on the money, then lifted back to Yiska's face. A thin, superior smile touched his lips. "Grain," he repeated, as if the word were new to him. "For horses." He tapped the silver dollars with a fingernail. "This might get you 1 bag. Maybe prices are up." "The price is what it was last moon," Yiska said, his voice level. He did not move. "The price," Morrison said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, insulting whisper, "is what I say it is. And I say an Indian with $3 and some dry skins ought to be grateful for whatever he can get from a white man's charity." Yiska felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, the old, quick anger of the warrior. He imagined, for a split second, the feel of his hand closing on the shopkeeper's white apron. But he held it down. He was not here as a warrior. He was here as a man trying to feed his family. He was on their ground, playing by their rules. He kept his hands flat on the counter. The wood was smooth beneath his palms. He was about to speak again, to barter, to swallow the bile of the man's contempt, when the bell on the door tinkled once more. The air in the store did not just change, it curdled. The tension that had been focused on Yiska suddenly shifted, redirecting itself with a new, uglier energy. Ada McKenna walked in. She was not holding her son's hand. Jamie was clutching a handful of her faded blue skirt, half hiding behind her. In her other arm, she carried a small basket containing perhaps a dozen eggs and a glass jar of milk. She moved with that same straight-backed dignity Yiska had noted from the street, but he could see the tightness in her jaw, the way she kept her eyes focused on the counter, refusing to meet the stares that felt like hands on her. She approached a different section of the counter, far from Yiska, and set her basket down. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "I have these eggs, and the milk. I need flour, and salt, and a little sugar, if it is not too much." Morrison turned his back on Yiska completely. The thin, superior smile became a broad, oily sneer of false piety. He clasped his hands on his apron. "Well now, Mistress McKenna, come to grace us again. Have you?" "I am just looking to trade," she said, her face pale. "Trade?" Morrison scoffed, loud enough for the checker players to hear. "The way I see it, your credit ran out last month, and the month before that." He gestured to the sparse offerings in her basket. "This here does not cover what you already owe, let alone new goods. This town cannot be expected to feed a widow who does not pay her way." "It is just flour. Judd," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is always just flour," one of the checker players called out. He was a big, beefy man with a stained vest, one of Logan Pike's men. Yiska recognized him from the saloon. "Maybe you got other ways to pay your debts, Ada." The other man laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Yeah, Pike would probably take a payment in kind, though I reckon he would want a discount, considering." Jamie, the small boy, pressed his face deeper into his mother's skirt. Ada's hand went to his head, stroking his hair, but her face had gone from pale to a stark, bloodless white. She was trembling now, a fine, barely visible shaking in her hands. She stared at the sack of flour on the shelf behind Morrison, as if it were a mountain she could not climb. Yiska watched. He was invisible now, a shadow at the end of the counter. And as he watched, the scene in front of him dissolved. The dusty store faded, and he was a boy of 14 again, huddled in the washout, the sand stinging his face. He remembered 2 of Graham Pike's hunters dragging a Comanche woman from a lodge, one of the women who had not escaped. They had laughed that same wet, ugly laugh. They had pushed her to her knees, pulled her hair, called her names in their tongue he did not understand, but whose meaning was brutally clear. He remembered his own mother's hand over his mouth, stifling his cry of rage, her fingernails digging into his cheek as she whispered, "Be still, live." His hand, resting on the counter, slowly curled into a fist. His knuckles turned white. The first man, the one with the vest, took a step away from the barrel. He was drunk, even at this hour of the morning. He hitched his gun belt. "What is the matter? Ada too good to talk to us. You was not too good for Elias, and he was 10 times the man we are." He lurched forward and grabbed her arm. It was too much. Ada stumbled, pulling her son with her. The boy let out a tiny, terrified yelp. And in that moment of pure fear, as she fought for her balance, Ada McKenna leaned down to her son, her face close to his ear, and she whispered a single word. It was not English. She said, "It is safe," but she said it in the language of the people, Tsanu, a simple phrase of comfort, a mother's word to a child, a word Yiska had not heard from a white person's lips in his entire life. Yiska's breath stopped in his chest. It was as if the world, which had been spinning in its ugly, predictable circle, had suddenly jammed to a halt. His mind could not process it. A white woman, the widow of Elias McKenna, the Indian hunter, here, in this town that hated his people. She spoke his mother's tongue. How? Why? The man still had his hand on her arm. "What was that talking that heathen talk now? Are you—" Yiska moved. He did not think. He simply acted. He was not a shadow anymore. He took 2 long, silent strides. He did not touch the drunken cowboy. He did not need to. He simply placed his body between the man and Ada. Then he turned back to the counter. He picked up the 3 heavy silver dollars and threw them down, one by one. The sound cracked through the silence. Clang, clang, clang! He shoved the bundle of furs toward Morrison. "The 3 bags of grain," Yiska said, his voice a low growl that was nothing like the polite bartering tone he had used before. He pointed a single, steady finger at the sack of flour behind the counter, then at the salt, then the sugar. "And what she needs, put it on my trade." The store was utterly silent. The cowboy who had grabbed her was frozen, his mouth half open, his hand still hovering in the air where Ada's arm had been. Judd Morrison looked as if he had swallowed a live frog. "Now," Yiska said. "An Indian," the cowboy sputtered, his drunken courage returning as indignation. "An Indian buying for the Poison Widow?" The store erupted. "What in hell? Since when do they walk in here giving orders?" Morrison, however, was looking at Yiska's eyes. He was a small, greedy man, but he was not a fool. He had lived on the frontier long enough to know the difference between a drunk cowboy's bluster and the absolute, deadly calm he saw in the Comanche's face. He knew the stories. He knew that this kind of quiet could turn to sudden, bloody violence. And he knew, more practically, that he did not want a fight to start in his store, not with his shelves full of glass jars. Reluctantly, almost painfully, he nodded. He reached for the flour. "I do not think he will be buying anything today." The voice cut through the noise like a razor. It was deep, confident, and carried the easy authority of a man who never had to raise it. Logan Pike stepped into the store. He did not have to push his way in. The other men simply melted away, creating a path for him. He was a big man, as Yiska had seen. But inside the cramped store, he seemed to take up all the air. He wore his dark suit and a string tie, and he was smoothing a pair of black leather gloves over his hands, one finger at a time. He looked completely calm, as if he were stepping in to discuss the weather. He let his gaze travel the room, and everything it touched seemed to file itself away. He saw the drunken cowboy, the frightened shopkeeper, the pale, trembling woman, and the small boy hiding behind her. Then, his eyes settled on Yiska. He looked at Yiska not as a man, but as a thing, an obstacle, a dog that had wandered into the house and was sitting on the good rug. "An Indian," Pike said, his voice full of a mild, almost amused curiosity. "Should know his place." He took a step closer, stopping just out of arm's reach. He was taller than Yiska, broader. "Your place is on the reservation, not in here, not playing the hero." He turned his gaze, cold and possessive, onto Ada. "Mistress McKenna, you seem to be attracting the wrong sort of attention again." Ada flinched as if he had struck her, but she held her ground, her hand still protectively on her son's head. She tried to speak. I did not ask." "I am sure you did not," Pike said, cutting her off. He looked back at Yiska. "Take your furs, get your horse, and ride out. What happens in Red Rock with our women is not your concern." The challenge was laid. The entire store waited. This was the moment. Yiska knew he could push it. He knew he could force the violence that his body craved, the violence that felt like justice for his father, for his people, for the woman his mother had been. But he also saw the small boy, Jamie, peeking out from his mother's skirt. He saw the sheer, unadulterated terror in the child's eyes. And he knew that any violence he started here would splash onto this woman and her child. Pike wanted that. Pike was goading him into an act that would prove him a savage. That would give Pike the excuse he needed. Yiska held Logan Pike's gaze for a long, silent count. He let the man see the anger in his eyes, but he also let him see the control. Then, slowly, deliberately, Yiska relaxed his fists. He looked past Pike, past the leering cowboys, and at Ada. She was staring at him, her face a mask of confusion, fear, and something else he could not name. Gratitude, maybe, or shame. "I cannot accept," she whispered, her voice so low only he could hear it. "Please, you will only make it worse." Yiska looked at this woman, who had his mother's words on her tongue. He looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her. He saw the cage she was in, a cage built of the same men who had destroyed his own world. He spoke, his voice just as low, not looking directly at her, but at a point on the wall just past her shoulder. It was a courtesy, a way to let her keep her pride, to not make it seem they were allied. "It is not for you to accept," he said, the English words feeling heavy. "The sky takes, And sometimes it gives back. It was an old saying, a way to explain the unexplainable. It was his way of saying he understood loss. He turned back to Morrison. The grain was still on the counter. The flour and salt were not. Pike had won this round. Without another word, Yiska picked up his pouch of silver. He left the furs. Let the man call it charity. He turned his back on Logan Pike, on the stunned silence of the room, and walked out. The bell tinkled behind him, a mocking, cheerful farewell. Ada McKenna quickly gathered her son, her empty basket in her hand, and fled through the door he had just used, her face burning with humiliation. She hurried past him on the boardwalk, not looking at him, and began to untie the worn-out mule hitched to a small, rickety wagon. Yiska stood by his black stallion, the red dust of the street settling on his shoulders. He had his silver, he had his pride, but he did not have the grain. And as he watched the widow and her son hurry to leave, he knew, with a sinking, certain feeling, that his mission had just changed. He had come to town for grain, but he had just found himself in the middle of a war he did not understand, standing on the side of the most hated woman in Red Rock, and he could not, for the life of him, figure out how to ride away. He stood on the boardwalk, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. The 3 bags of grain he had come for were still in Judd Morrison's store, along with his furs. He had his silver, but he had failed his people. His mission was over, a failure. He watched Ada McKenna. She fumbled with the knot on the mule's hitching rein, her hands still shaking from the confrontation. She lifted her son, Jamie, and settled him on the wagon's hard wooden seat. The boy was silent, his small face pale. She did not have her eggs or her milk, but she did have a small, brown paper parcel clutched in her hand, the flour and salt he had managed to force Morrison to sell. It was a tiny victory, but it had cost them both their dignity. She climbed up beside the boy and snapped the reins. The mule, bony and tired, leaned into the harness, and the wagon's wheels gave a long, painful squeak as they began to turn. The wagon moved slowly down the red street, away from the saloons, away from the watching eyes, heading toward the low, empty hills. Yiska watched her back. It was, as he had noted before, impossibly straight. She was diminished, humiliated, and poor, but she would not slouch. She would not show them her defeat. A strange feeling stirred in Yiska's chest. It was not anger, not anymore. That had burned out, leaving a cold ash. This was something else. It was curiosity, sharp and insistent, about the Comanche words she had spoken. It was a feeling of responsibility. It was a sense that the spirits of this place had just moved a piece on a board, and he was that piece. He should have been angry at the failed trade. He should have been mounting his stallion to ride back to the reservation, to report his failure to the chief. His people were hungry. His duty was clear. But he could not move. He could not leave. Not yet. You picked a poor day to play the hero. Friend. The voice was quiet, spoken near his shoulder. Yiska did not turn, but his senses registered the man. Young. White. He did not smell of whiskey or unwashed wool. He smelled of coal smoke and clean sweat. Yiska remained silent, his gaze fixed on the wagon, which was now just a small shape in the shimmering heat at the end of the street. The man stepped partly into his view. He was young, maybe 20 years old, with earnest eyes and hands stained black at the knuckles and under the nails. He wiped one of them on his leather apron. He was the blacksmith. "That was Tom Hartley," the young man said, nodding toward the saloon where Pike's man had disappeared. "And that was Logan Pike he works for. You just painted a target on your back, and on hers." Yiska gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. The world was full of targets. The blacksmith, seeing his warning had no effect, seemed to wrestle with himself, then decided to say more. He lowered his voice. "Look, I do not care what a man's skin is, but you do not understand. Helping Ada McKenna, That is not like helping someone else. She is complicated. She is bad luck." Yiska turned his head slowly and looked at the blacksmith. His eyes were flat, impassive. "Bad luck," he repeated. The white man's words for things he did not understand. "They say she poisoned her husband," the young man whispered. Glancing around, his name was Tom Hartley, and he seemed like a man who hated gossip but was forced to swim in it. Elias McKenna. He was a hard man, a terrible man, if you ask me, but he was Logan Pike's partner. Once. Yiska's gaze sharpened, the name Pike again. "Not just partners in land," Tom continued, warming to his subject now, feeling the need to make this stranger understand the danger. "They rode together, back in the day. Elias, he was a tracker, an Indian hunter. He rode with Logan's older brother, Graham Pike, for years. Joined that big raid on a Comanche camp up on the Cimarron 10, maybe 11 years ago. The air left Yiska's lungs. The buzzing of the flies, the distant clang of the smith's hammer, the heat of the sun on his face. It all vanished. There was only the name, Graham Pike. The name that was carved into his memory like a wound that would not scar over. The man who had led the charge. The man who had murdered his father. His chest felt tight, as if a hand had reached inside and was squeezing his heart. This woman, this widow, she had spoken his mother's tongue, and she had been the wife of a man who rode with his father's killer. The spirits were not just moving pieces. They were weaving a rope. Yiska turned from the blacksmith, the man's warning dissolving into meaningless noise. He looked at the wagon, now almost out of sight. He was supposed to go back to his hungry people. He was supposed to return with nothing, a failed warrior. But he could not. The Comanche word, the name of his father's murderer. He could not leave this. It was a story that had begun before he was born, and he had just walked into the middle of it. He put his foot into the loop of his horse's rein and swung himself onto the stallion's back. The movement was a single, fluid ripple. He had failed to get the grain, but he would get answers. He had a reason, a practical one he could tell himself. The men in the saloon, the drunk one who had grabbed her, they were Pike's men. They might follow her, they might, feeling bold after their victory. Ride out to her ranch to finish the lesson. He would see her home. He would see her safe. It was the only honorable thing to do. But he knew, in the cold part of his soul, that this was not the true reason. The true reason was the word, and the name. He urged the stallion forward, not into a gallop, but a steady, ground-eating trot. The horse moved silently, its hooves making soft thuds in the deep red dust. He caught up to her in 10 minutes. The wagon was slow, the mule stubborn. He did not ride up close. He did not call out. He simply moved his horse to the side of the track, about 30 yards away, and rode parallel to her. He saw her entire body jolt when she first noticed him. Her head snapped around, her eyes wide with a new fear. She thought he was one of Pike's men. She snapped the reins, trying to urge the tired mule into a faster walk, but the animal just flicked its ears and plodded on. Yiska kept his pace, matching hers exactly. He was a shadow, a silent guardian she had not asked for. He could feel her fear coming off her in waves. Even across the distance, it mixed with the smell of the hot dust and the dry grass. This went on for another mile. The silence of the prairie was broken only by the squeak of her wagon wheel, one wheel, over and over. A sound like a bird in pain and the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves. Finally, she could not stand it. She pulled back on the reins, bringing the mule to a halt. The wagon groaned. She sat there, her back straight, but he could see her shoulders trembling. She did not look at him. She looked straight ahead at the road. "What do you want?" she called out, her voice thin and tight. Yiska stopped his horse. He, too, looked ahead. "You are not safe. The men in the town are drunk." "I am safer from them than I am from you," she said, but there was no conviction in it. Go away, please. You saw what happened. Your presence, it makes things worse. Logan Pike will use it against me. He is already against you, Yiska said, his voice flat. He was against you before I walked into that store. She finally turned her head. She looked at him, truly looked at him, her gaze sweeping over him, the braid in his dark hair, the high line of his cheekbones, the stillness in his eyes. He was the enemy her husband had hunted, and he was the only man who had stood for her. The confusion was plain on her face. Why, she asked, the word almost a whisper. Why did you do that, a man like you? You do not need more enemies. Yiska thought for a moment. He thought of his father. He thought of Pike. He thought of the humiliation in the store. He turned his gaze from the horizon and met her eyes. Some enemies are worth having, he said. Her breath caught. She understood his meaning. He was not talking about her. He was talking about Logan Pike. He was choosing this. He nudged his horse forward, closing the distance, until he was beside the wagon. He looked at the small boy, Jamie, who was staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes, a mixture of terror and absolute fascination. I will see you to your ranch, Yiska said. It was not a question. Ada looked down at her hands, which were clenched in her lap. She was too tired to argue. She was too beaten down to refuse the first offer of help she had received in over a year. She nodded, a single, jerky motion. She slapped the reins, and the wagon squeaked back into life. Yiska rode beside her, close enough now to hear the mule's breathing. The silence returned, but it was different. It was no longer a silence of fear, but one of heavy, unspoken questions. The boy, Jamie, slept, his head falling against his mother's arm. The sun was hot. The only sound was the wheel. The word you spoke, Yiska said, his voice quiet, not looking at her. She flinched. What? Sa-nu, he said. It is safe, a word for a child. Ada was silent for a long time. The wagon creaked. I did not know I remembered it, she said finally, her voice small. It came out. He was so frightened. Where did you hear this word? Yiska asked. He kept his tone level. A simple question, but his heart was pounding. A slow, heavy drum against his ribs. She hesitated. It was a long story, and he was a stranger, an Indian. But he had stood for her. He had taken her side. She owed him this. Years ago, she said, her eyes on the mule's ears. I was newly married. Elias, my husband, he took me with him on a trip. He said it was a hunting party. I did not know what that meant. Not really. I thought they were hunting bison. Her voice was bitter. They were hunting men. Yiska's hands tightened on his horse's mane. He said nothing. There was a sandstorm, she went on, her voice becoming distant, lost in the memory. It came up so fast, blackened the sky at midday. I was separated from the wagons. I got lost. My horse threw me. I was alone for, I think, 2 days. I had no water. I was sure I was going to die. She paused, and Yiska could hear the old terror in her breathing. A woman found me, a Comanche woman. I was half dead. I thought she was a spirit. She was digging for roots, and she found me in a dry creek bed. She saved me. Yiska's entire body was rigid. He kept his face turned away from her, afraid she would see the truth in his eyes. She gave me water from a skin. She was not young. Her face was full of lines, sad lines, but her eyes were proud. She helped me walk to her lodge, just a small one, hidden in the rocks. She fed me. She cleaned the sores on my feet. She spoke no English. I spoke no Comanche. She was alone, Ada whispered. Her man was gone. I think her children were gone, too. There was such a sadness in her. But she was kind. I was there for 3 days. My son, Jamie, he was just a baby then. Back at the fort, I kept crying, thinking of him. The woman, she must have understood. She patted my head, and she said that word. Tsa nu. It is safe. She taught it to me. She would point to the sky, then to me, then to the baby I was pretending to rock in my arms. And she would say it. Ada fell silent. My husband, she said, her voice hard now, and his party, they found the lodge. They were tracking me. She closed her eyes. I ran out, yelling, telling them not to shoot. The woman, she just stood in the opening of her lodge, watching them. She was not afraid. Elias was angry. He wanted to take her, as a prisoner. But Graham Pike, he laughed. He said she was old and not worth the trouble. They gave her a bag of sugar and they took me back. She finally looked at Yiska. Her eyes were swimming with tears she refused to let fall. I never forgot her, she said. She was kind to me, for no reason. And my husband, he was one of the men who hunted her people. Yiska could not speak. The world had turned upside down. The woman she described, the lodge, the kindness, the sadness. It was his mother. It was his mother in the last year of her life, after his father was killed, before the sickness took her. She had been wandering, half mad with grief, living alone, and she had found this white woman, the wife of her people's killer, and she had shown her kindness. She had given her the word of comfort. He felt a dizziness, a sense of a circle closing that was so vast and terrible and beautiful that he could not grasp it. His mother had saved Ada. Now, he was here, sitting beside her, drawn by a force he did not understand, a debt, an echo. They rode the rest of the way in silence. The ranch came into view. It was small, as he had seen from a distance, a simple wooden house, a sagging barn, and a broken fence. It sat in the open, vulnerable, with the low hills rising behind it, a perfect place for a man to hide with a rifle. Ada stopped the wagon by the small porch. She looked exhausted, her body slumping now that she was home. Yiska dismounted. He walked to the wagon and looked at the sleeping boy. I can take him, he offered. Ada hesitated, then nodded. She was too tired to lift him. Yiska reached up. He had never held a white child. His hands, strong and calloused from horses and bows, were gentle. He lifted Jamie, who stirred, murmured, and then, feeling the strong, steady hold, burrowed his face into Yiska's shoulder and fell deeper asleep. Yiska carried the boy into the house. It was just one room, but it was clean. A bed in one corner, a small table, a cold fireplace. Ada followed him, carrying the small brown parcel of flour. He laid the boy on the bed and pulled the thin blanket over him. Jamie's face, in sleep, was peaceful. Yiska turned. Ada was standing by the table, her hands on the parcel. Thank you, she said. It was not enough. The words were small and useless. He will be safe, Yiska said, looking at the boy. He was speaking of Jamie, but he was also speaking his mother's word. Ada stood very still. You should go, she said, her voice full of fear again. But for him now, not of him. If Logan Pike's men see your horse here. Yiska nodded. He walked to the door and paused, looking back at her. She stood in the dim light of her small, clean, besieged home, a widow tied to his past by a thread of impossible kindness. He is already watching, Yiska said again. He stepped out into the blinding late afternoon sun. He swung onto his stallion. He had ridden into Red Rock that morning for 3 bags of grain, a simple mission to keep his people alive. He turned his horse, not toward the reservation, but toward a low rise where he could watch the ranch. He was leaving without the grain. He was leaving with a mystery, with the ghost of his mother, and with a connection to a woman he did not know, but who was now, whether he wished it or not. His responsibility, his life path had just been altered, And he knew, with the certainty of a hunter reading a track, that it would lead him straight back into the fire. 3 days. He had spent 3 days back with his people, in the dusty, hopeless camp. He had given the silver dollars to the chief, along with the news of his failure. He had left the furs in the white man's store. The chief had looked at him, his eyes full of a weary disappointment that was worse than anger. "You did what you could," the chief had said, which meant, "You failed." Yiska had sat in the council, listening to the old men talk of hunger and the coming cold. He had tried to empty his mind, to forget the white woman's face and the sound of his mother's word on her tongue. But the image would not leave. It was a burr under his saddle blanket, a stone in his moccasin, the memory of her, standing in her small house, and the story of his mother had become tangled with the ghost of his father and the burning hatred for the name Pike. He told himself it was the debt. His mother had saved this woman. Now, this woman was in danger from the same kind of men who had orphaned him. The spirits had woven a rope, and he was tied to it. He could not, in honor, leave it alone. So, on the morning of the 4th day, he took his stallion and rode out. He told no one where he was going. He had a few dried roots in a pouch, and he had his knife. He told himself he was going to see if he could trade for the grain again, perhaps with a different settler, or hunt on the open land. But his horse knew. The black stallion turned its head toward the low hills that sheltered the widow's ranch, and Yiska did not pull on the rein. He smelled the trouble before he saw it, a faint, acrid smell of burnt feathers on the wind. He slowed his horse to a walk, his senses sharp, his eyes scanning the horizon. He came over the last rise and looked down at the small ranch. At first, everything looked the same. The house stood, the barn leaned, but then he saw it. The small flock of chickens she kept was scattered, and 3 of them lay in the dirt. Still, their necks broken. The small wire pen was torn open. He rode closer. The top rail of her meager fence was cut, the wood showing white and new. As he got closer to the house, he saw the star-shaped crack in the window beside the door. In the dirt below it, he saw a rock. His jaw tightened. He swung off his horse and walked to the fence line. He crouched, his fingers brushing the dirt. The tracks were clear, 3, maybe 4 horses. Shod, white men's boots. They had been here in the night. They had not come to steal, or they would have taken the mule. They had come to send a message. This was not the work of children. This was the work of drunken men, Pike's men. He heard the sound of an axe splitting wood, a desperate, angry rhythm. He followed it around the back of the house. Ada was there, attacking a fallen log with a dull axe. Her hair had come loose from its bun, and damp strands stuck to her face. She was putting all her fear and rage into the wood. Jamie sat on the back step, watching her, his small face tight with worry. When she saw Yiska, she froze. The axe stopped in midair. Her first expression was not gratitude. It was raw, undiluted fear. She thought he was one of them. Come back in the daylight. "Mistress McKenna," he said, his voice quiet, his hands held open and away from his knife. She let out a long, shuddering breath and lowered the axe. Her face, flushed from the work, was now pale. "You," she said. It was just a whisper. "You should not be here. You must not be here." "They came," he said. It was a statement. He nodded toward the broken window, toward the dead chickens. She turned away, her back to him, and resumed her attack on the log. Thwack, thwack! The blade was biting poorly. "It was children," she said, her voice tight, matching the rhythm of the axe. "Town boys, playing a mean trick. It is nothing." "It was not children," Yiska said. He walked past her to the wood pile. He picked up a piece of the wood she had already split. He looked at the tracks her boots had made, and then at the larger, deeper tracks nearby. The men who came last night, they left these. She stopped, her shoulders slumped. The lie was too heavy to hold. She leaned on the axe handle, breathing hard. "I know," she whispered. I know. She looked up at him, her eyes a mixture of desperation and a strange, fierce pride. But what am I to do? Run? They want me to run. Logan Pike wants this land. If I run, he wins. I cannot run. Yiska looked at her, at this small, stubborn woman. She was a fool to stay. She was brave to stay. The two things were the same. He took the axe from her hands. She let it go, her fingers numb. The blade is loose, he said, and dull. He tested the edge with his thumb. You will work all day and have no firewood. He looked at Jamie. The boy was still watching him, silent. Go get me a small stone, Yiska said to him. A flat one, from the creek bed. Jamie looked at his mother. Ada, confused, nodded. The boy scrambled off the step and ran toward the dry gully. Yiska sat on the log she had been trying to split. He took his knife. He began to shave a thin piece of hardwood to make a new wedge for the axe handle. Ada just watched him, her arms wrapped around her waist. She was trapped. She could not tell him to leave, because she needed the help. And she could not let him stay, because his presence was the reason the men had come. You are pulling them to me, she said, her voice hollow. They were already here, Yiska said, not looking up from his work. Pike wants your water. He wanted it before I came. I am just an excuse. Jamie ran back, holding up a piece of sandstone. Yiska took it. This is good. He used the stone, with the patience of a man who had made his own tools all his life, to sharpen the axe blade. The sound was a rhythmic, scraping shush that was a comfort in the tense silence. Why are you here? Ada asked. You failed to get your grain. You shamed Logan Pike. You should be 100 miles away. I am here, Yiska said, because my mother once saved a white woman who was lost, a woman whose husband hunted my people. Ada's breath hitched. She stared at him. How did you know? The woman she saved was you, Yiska said, his eyes still on the axe blade. The woman who saved you, she was my mother. Ada put her hand to her mouth. The world seemed to tilt. The Comanche who had stood for her in the store, the man she was half afraid of, was the son of the kind woman from her nightmares, the only spot of grace in those dark years. The rope the spirits were weaving, as Yiska had thought, had just pulled tight, binding them together in a way neither could have expected. I did not know, she whispered. I am so sorry for what my husband... He is dead, Yiska said, his voice flat. He did not want her sorrow. It was useless. He finished with the wedge, driving it deep into the axe head with a rock. He stood up. He swung the axe. It bit deep into the log, splitting it clean. Now it is a tool. He worked for the next hour. He split her wood. He went to the broken fence and began to mend it, using his knowledge of knots to splice the cut rails together. He walked the perimeter of her small property. He found the place by the well where the ground was soft and knelt to check the water level. It was low, but it was clear and sweet, as Pike knew. Ada watched him from the porch. She had gone from fear to a state of profound confusion. He was an Indian. He was the savage her husband had described over drunken fires, the enemy, the other, but Elias had never fixed a fence. Elias had never split wood without cursing and throwing the axe. Elias had never, not once, looked at Jamie with anything but annoyance or anger. Yiska had stopped by the boy, who was watching the black stallion. Yiska spoke to Jamie, his voice too low for Ada to hear. He was showing him how to approach the horse, how to hold his hand out flat, how to read the animal's ears. He saw Yiska lift the small boy and settle him on the stallion's broad back, leading the horse in a small, slow circle. Jamie was not afraid. He was laughing, a small, bright sound that Ada had not heard in months. She watched this man. She watched the way his muscles moved under his hide shirt, a lean, efficient power. He moved like a part of the landscape, quiet and sure. He was, she realized with a jolt that went straight to her stomach, a beautiful man. And he was kind. This combination was so foreign to her experience of men that she did not know what to do with it. She felt a deep, aching gratitude, and it terrified her. If she let this man stay, if she let herself feel this safety, what would happen when he left, or worse? What would happen if he was hurt because of her? She was dragging him down. She was the poison widow, and she was pulling this good, dangerous man into her own grave. The sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of orange and bruised purple. The air grew cold, as it did in the high country, the moment the sun left it. Yiska finished with the fence. He walked back to the house. He had not eaten all day. "You should go," Ada said, her voice stronger now. "It will be dark soon. They will see your fire." "I do not make a fire when I am watching," he said. He looked at her, and he saw the exhaustion in her face, the dark circles under her eyes. He also saw the small bag of flour, the one he had bought her, sitting on her porch. She had not even taken it inside. "You have not eaten," he said. "Neither have you," she replied. An understanding passed between them. They were two outcasts, hungry and besieged, standing in the fading light. "I have beans," she said, her voice dropping. "And there is a little salt pork. I can make cornbread, with the flour you gave me." It was an invitation. It was a risk. It was a plea. Yiska nodded. "I will get water." He took the bucket and went to the well. She went inside to start the fire. The small cabin was dark, but the fire in the hearth soon filled it with a flickering, orange light. It felt warm. It felt safe. Yiska sat at the small table, watching her. Jamie, exhausted from his fear and his excitement, had fallen asleep on his cot. Ada moved with a quiet efficiency, her hands mixing the cornmeal and flour, her body swaying slightly as she worked. Yiska watched her. He watched the firelight catch the loose strands of her brown hair, turning them to copper. He watched the line of her back, straight and proud even when she was bending over the skillet. She set the beans to heat and put the skillet of cornbread on the coals. She turned to get the salt pork from a high shelf. At the same moment, Yiska stood, intending to move the skillet to a better spot on the hearth. They collided in the small space. He, all coiled stillness, and she, all weary movement. He put his hands out to steady her, and his palms landed on her waist. She gasped, her hands flying up, one of them landing flat on his chest. Time stopped. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the sudden, loud pounding of Ada's heart in her own ears. His hands were hard, calloused, and hot through the thin cotton of her dress. Her hand was pressed against his chest, and she could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. It was so different from the frantic, whiskey-fueled pounding she remembered from Elias. She was close enough to smell him. He smelled of dust, of cedar smoke from his camp, of his horse, and of his own clean, male sweat. It was a raw, earthy smell, and it did not frighten her. It did something else. It made her feel a sudden, sharp jolt of awareness, a quickening low in her belly that she had thought long dead. It was the first time in her life she had felt attraction that was not tangled with fear. His eyes were on her, in the firelight. They were dark, the pupils wide. He was looking at her mouth. He could feel the slight tremble in her body under his hands. He could smell her, a faint scent of soap and wood smoke and the woman herself. He should have let her go. She should have pulled away. Neither of them moved. It was a long, breathless moment, a question hanging in the warm, dark air. A log shifted in the fireplace, showering the hearth with sparks. The spell broke. Ada pulled her hand back as if burned. Yiska dropped his hands from her waist. They stepped apart. Two people who had just touched fire. The bread," Ada stammered, turning back to the hearth, her face burning. Yiska sat back down at the table, his own breathing suddenly uneven. They ate in silence. The food was simple, just beans and bread and a few scraps of salty pork, but to Yiska, who had eaten dry roots for 2 days. It was a feast. Jamie stirred on his cot and sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Is it morning?" he asked. "No, love," Ada said, her voice soft. "It is supper. Come and eat." She fixed a plate for him. The boy climbed onto the chair across from Yiska, his legs dangling. He looked at the Comanche man over his spoon. Yiska met his gaze, his face calm. "Mr. Yiska," Jamie said, his voice small and clear in the quiet room. "Jamie, do not bother," Ada began. "It is all right," Yiska said. "What is it? Little warrior." Jamie swallowed his mouth full of beans. "Are you a good man? Or a bad man?" Ada froze, a piece of cornbread halfway to her mouth. "Jamie, what a thing to say." "No," the boy insisted, his eyes serious. "At the store, Mr. Morrison and Mr. Pike, they said you were a bad Indian, but you gave Mama the flour. And you fixed the fence, and you let me ride your horse. So which one is it?" The silence in the cabin was absolute. Ada looked at Yiska, her heart aching, wondering how this man would answer an impossible question. Yiska looked at the small, serious face of the boy. He thought of his father, dead in the snow. He thought of his hungry people. He thought of the men in the town, and the name Pike. He thought of the woman across from him, and the debt he owed her. "I am not a good man," Yiska said, his voice quiet. "And I am not a bad man. I am a man who is trying very hard not to be worse than fate and the white man. Make me be." Ada looked down at her plate. Her eyes were suddenly bright with unshed tears. He had not just answered the boy. He had answered her. He had told her his entire life, his entire struggle. In one sentence, he was a man doing the right thing in a world that punished him for it. Later, when the meal was done and the boy was asleep again, Yiska stood to leave. You will be careful," Ada said, standing by the door. It was not a question. "I am always careful," he said. He looked at her face softened by the firelight, the fear in her eyes replaced by something new, something fragile. He wanted to reach out, to touch her hair, he did not know what. He just knew he wanted to. He turned and left, melting into the darkness. He did not go far. He led his stallion into a small hollow, a place where he could see the ranch but not be seen. He would watch. But first, he went to the gate. He had seen something as he rode in, something that had not been there that morning. He found it. Tied to the top post of her gate was a small strip of dark red cloth, tied in a specific knot. It was a landmarker symbol. It was Logan Pike's brand. It was a sign to his men and to anyone else. It said, "This is mine. It is marked." Yiska stood in the cold starlight, the cloth in his hand. He had come here because of a debt to his mother. He had stayed because of the need he saw in a small boy's eyes. But now, it was something else. He looked at the small house, a single point of warm light in the vast, cold dark. He tore the red cloth from the post, his movement sharp and violent. He crushed it in his fist and threw it to the ground. This was not about his mother anymore. This was about Logan Pike. This was about the name that had haunted him for 10 years. If Pike had marked this land, then Yiska would mark it, too. He would stand between the woman in that house and the man who thought he owned the world. He had chosen his side. Yiska did not return to the reservation for 5 days. He camped in the low hills above Ada's ranch. A ghost she could not see but sometimes felt. He hunted, bringing back 2 rabbits which he left hanging by her woodshed, skinned and cleaned. He watched the road from Red Rock. He watched the horizon. He was a silent guardian, bound by a debt to his mother and the pull of something new and unsettling. When he finally rode back into his own camp, the air was cold, not just with the weather, but with the displeasure of his people. The chief did not summon him, which was a bad sign. It was Kills with a Knife, one of the elder warriors, who approached him as he tended his stallion. "You were gone long," Kills with a knife said, his voice flat. He was a man whose face was a map of old battles. Your belly is full. Ours are not. You went for grain. You came back with nothing. Now you leave again, to hunt for yourself. I hunted, Yiska said, not meeting the older man's gaze. But the game is thin. The game is always thin, the warrior replied, stepping closer. But the talk is thick. Talk that you spend your time at the ranch of a white woman, the widow of a hunter who killed our brothers. You were sent to trade for our survival. Yiska, not to keep a white woman warm. Yiska's head snapped up. His eyes flashed. You will not speak of her that way. Kills with a knife grunted. It is as I thought. You are lost. You are forgetting your duty. Your father's son, chasing after the people who murdered him. The children are hungry. Yiska, and you are guarding her. It is a shame on your father's spirit. Yiska felt the truth of the words like a blow. He was torn. Every moment he spent near Ada's ranch was a moment he was not hunting for his people. Every rabbit he gave her was one he did not bring back to his sister's children. He was caught between the debt to his mother's ghost and the debt to his living, breathing people. It was a conflict that was tearing him in two, and he had no answer for it. He turned his back on the old warrior, the shame burning hot in his chest. The talk in the Comanche camp was matched by the talk in Red Rock. Logan Pike did not need to get his hands dirty. He had other tools. He sat in the saloon, buying drinks, and let the poison spread. A crying shame, he was heard to say to Judd Morrison, his voice loud enough to carry poor Elias McKenna, barely a year in the ground, and his widow is opening her door to a Comanche buck. A savage. It sells his memory cheap. The whispers grew. The poison widow was now the Indian's woman. Women crossing the street in Red Rock would pull their children aside when Ada drove her wagon in, which she now did only when starvation forced her to. They whispered that she was a traitor to her own kind. Pike made his second move. He went to the sheriff's office, not the saloon. He carried a leather satchel. He sat with Sheriff Brody, a man who liked a quiet life and Pike's money. It is not just a moral failing, Sheriff, Pike said, his voice reasonable. It is a legal one. He produced a sheaf of papers. I was Elias's partner. When he died, he owed me a great deal of money. Money I have, out of the goodness of my heart, forborne to collect from the grieving widow. He slid a promissory note across the desk, signed with Elias McKenna's drunken scrawl. But now, she is harboring a hostile, that young Comanche, Yiska. He threatened me in my own town. He is a known agitator. Who is to say she is not feeding him information, giving him supplies? She is a danger. Sheriff, an alliance like that, it could encourage an uprising. Sheriff Brody, who was no fool, knew exactly what Pike was doing. He also knew his job depended on Pike's goodwill. I will look into it. Logan, he said, mopping his brow. You do that, Pike said. And in the meantime, I am afraid I must call in my debt. She has 30 days to pay, or my bank will be forced to foreclose. It is just business, you understand. The next day, Ada drove her wagon to town for medicine. Jamie had a cough, and she needed horehound syrup. As she came out of Morrison's store, he had sold it to her, but at 3 times the normal price she found her way blocked. It was Tom Hartley, the drunk from the store, and 2 of his friends. They were not just drunk, they were righteous. They were protectors of the town's decency. Looky here, Hartley sneered, stepping in front of her. It is the Indian's bride, come to spend his blood money. Please, let me pass, Ada said, clutching the small bottle. Not so fast, the second man said. He grabbed the side of her wagon. We do not want your kind here. Why do you not go back to your savage? Or maybe you can pay us the way you pay him. Hartley reached out and grabbed a handful of her skirt. Let's see what the Comanche finds so special, he leered. Ada cried out, a sound of pure terror, and struck his hand with the bottle. The man yelped in surprise. "Why, you—" he began, his face darkening, and he raised his hand to strike her. He never finished. A shadow moved from the alley beside the store. It was Yiska. He had followed her, worried that Pike's talk would lead to this. Yiska did not draw his knife. He did not need to. His hand shot out and caught Hartley's wrist, twisting it. The man screamed as the bones grated. Yiska used the man's own momentum to spin him around and slam him face first into the wagon wheel. The sound of the impact was a sick, wet thud. The other two men, startled, drew their pistols. Yiska was already moving. He kicked the first man in the knee, a sharp, disabling blow that sent the man sprawling into the dust, his pistol discharging harmlessly into the boardwalk. The third man, seeing his friends dispatched in 2 seconds, hesitated. That hesitation was all Yiska needed. He closed the distance, his fist connecting with the man's jaw in a short, brutal punch. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. The street was suddenly full of people, and then, strolling calmly through the crowd, came Sheriff Brody, his hand on his pistol. He had, as if by magic, arrived too late to see the attack, but just in time to see the response. "Hold it! Right there! Comanche!" Brody yelled, pointing his pistol at Yiska. "You are under arrest, assaulting white men in my town." They attacked me," Ada cried, her voice shaking. "They put their hands on me." "I saw what I saw. Mistress McKenna," Brody said, not looking at her. He was looking at Yiska, who stood very still, his chest rising and falling, the violence still humming in him. "He attacked 3 men, unprovoked." "That is a lie," Yiska said, his voice a low growl. "Maybe," Brody said. "But he is white." He pointed at Hartley, who was groaning and holding his broken wrist. "And you are not. Now, raise your—" Brody's words were cut short as Tom Hartley, the young blacksmith, pushed through the crowd. "It is a lie, Sheriff," Tom Hartley said, his honest face flushed with anger. "I saw the whole thing, from my forge. They had her cornered. Tom Hartley grabbed her skirt. This man," he pointed at Yiska, "he just stopped them." Sheriff Brody looked from the blacksmith, who was known for his honesty, to Logan Pike, who was now standing on the porch of the saloon, watching the entire scene with a cold, satisfied smile. Brody was trapped. "Well," Brody grumbled, "it is still a disturbance." He looked at Yiska. "I am not arresting you, but I am warning you. I see you in this town again. I will have you in a cell. You are not welcome here. Now, get out. And you," he said to Ada, "you get on home. You are nothing but trouble." Ada scrambled onto her wagon, her face burning. Yiska, his eyes locked on Logan Pike, walked to his stallion. He mounted, gave Pike one last look of pure, unadulterated hatred, and then followed Ada's wagon out of town. The ride was silent, but the battle lines had just been drawn in blood and dust. That night, Yiska did not camp in the hills. He rode straight to her ranch. She saw him coming and opened the door. He walked into the firelight of her small cabin, and she saw his face. "My God," she whispered. His left eye was swollen and purple. His lip was split, a cut that oozed blood. He must have taken the blows from the men after the sheriff arrived, holding himself back, refusing to fight an officer of the law. "Sit," she said, her voice sharp with an authority he had not heard. It was not the voice of a victim. It was the voice of his mother. He sat, wincing, at the small table. She put a kettle on the fire. She brought a basin and a clean cloth. Jamie was asleep on his cot, oblivious. She came back and stood in front of him. This is because of me." "This is because of Pike," he said, his voice thick from his split lip. "It is the same thing." She dipped the cloth in the warm water. "This will sting." She gently began to clean the blood and grime from the cut on his mouth. He sat rigid, his hands gripping his knees. Her touch was light, It did not hurt. It was the opposite of hurt. He was used to wounds. He was used to digging bullets out with his own knife, of packing them with moss. He was not used to this. He was not used to a soft cloth and warm water and the scent of soap and the feeling of her fingers, gentle, on his skin. He kept his eyes on the table. He could feel her breath, light and warm, near his cheek. She finished with his lip and moved to the swelling around his eye. Her touch was incredibly careful. "This is a bad one," she whispered. She looked at his face, at the strong, hard line of his jaw, now bruised, at the high sweep of his cheekbones. She was tending to him as she would have tended to Jamie. But this was not Jamie. This was a man, a warrior, and her heart was doing a strange, fluttering thing in her chest. She finished cleaning the cuts. You should take off your shirt," she said, her voice suddenly hesitant. "He kicked you in the ribs. I saw it. I need to see if one is broken." Yiska looked at her. Her face was earnest, professional. This was not a request. It was a command, for his own good. He nodded, slowly. He stood and untied the leather thong at his neck. He pulled the hide shirt over his head. Ada's breath caught in her throat. She had seen her husband's body. It had been pale and soft from drink. Yiska's body was something else entirely. It was the color of burnished copper in the firelight. It was lean, roped with muscle, a body built by a life of hard riding and constant movement, and it was covered in scars. There was the puckered mark of an old bullet hole on his shoulder. There were thin, white lines from knives, or claws. And then there was the one she had not seen, a long, angry scar that ran from his left collarbone down across his chest, ending just above his heart. She stepped closer, her clinical detachment forgotten. She felt a wave of, she did not know what, pity, awe, sorrow. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and lightly, so lightly, traced the long scar. Where did this one come from?" she whispered. Yiska did not move. Her touch was like a spark on his skin. It did not hurt. It set him on fire. He could feel the pulse in her fingertips. "Soldiers," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A cavalry charge. On the Washita. I was a boy, a saber." He remembered the cold, the screaming, the sting of the steel. He had not thought of it in years. She traced it again, her fingers following the raised line of damaged skin. She felt as if she were touching his soul, touching the pain he carried, the history of violence that had made him. He had taken this for his people, and he had taken the bruises on his face for her. The air in the cabin was suddenly too thick to breathe. It was warm from the fire, and charged with something else. Yiska looked down. He saw her head, her brown hair soft in the light. He saw her hand, pale against his dark skin. He could smell her, the faint, clean scent of her. Slowly, as if in a dream, he raised his hand. He did not touch her. He hovered, his fingers near her cheek. She looked up. Their eyes met. In that look, everything fell away. The town, the prejudice, the ghosts of his father and her husband. There was only this, a man, a woman, a small, warm room, safe from the dark. He lowered his hand and cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing the soft skin below her ear. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. A small sound, half sigh, half sob, escaped her. He lowered his head. He was slow. He was giving her every chance to pull away. He was giving himself every chance to stop. This was madness. She was a white woman. He was Comanche. This was a line they could not cross. And then his lips touched hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not chaste. It was hesitant. Yes, but it was also burning. It was the taste of blood from his cut lip, and the salt of the tears on her cheek. She had not even realized she was crying. It was the desperation of two people who had been alone for so long, starved of kindness, of touch. His other hand came up, burying itself in her hair, pulling the pins loose, letting it fall. Her hand clutched his shoulder, her fingers digging into the hard muscle. It was a kiss of shared pain and a sudden, shocking discovery of pleasure. It went on, deep and searching, until they were both breathless, clinging to each other in the firelight. They broke apart, but did not let go. They rested their foreheads together, their breathing harsh. Jamie stirred in his sleep, mumbling. The sound broke the spell. Ada pulled back, her face flushed, her eyes wide with what they had just done. She put her hands to her mouth. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, no, we cannot." "Ada," he said, his voice thick. "No," she said, backing away, wrapping her arms around herself. She looked at the cot where her son slept. "Yiska, I was the property of a cruel man for 10 years. I belonged to him. I am not sure I am ready to belong to anyone ever again." Yiska looked at her fear. It was not fear of him, it was fear of this, of what she felt. He understood. "I do not want you to belong to me," he said, his voice quiet but fierce. "Among my people, a woman is not a horse or a rifle. She does not belong to a man." He took a step toward her, but did not touch her. "We do not own each other, Ada. We walk beside the ones we choose to walk beside." She stared at him, this savage, this warrior, who had just spoken a truth her own civilized world had never taught her, a truth about freedom. That night, Yiska slept not in the hills, but on a blanket roll by her cold hearth. It was a statement. He was not leaving. And as he slept, a dream came. He was on the plains, and the great spirit horse, the ghost of all horses, came to him. His father was sitting on the horse's back. They were on the hill overlooking Ada's ranch. "You are tying yourself to her, my son," his father's spirit said. "This is a path your people will not understand, and her people will try to kill you for it." Yiska, in his dream, looked at his father. "I know." Then the great horse lowered its head, and it touched its nose to Yiska's forehead, a sign of a blessing, a sign that the path, though dangerous, was not wrong. He woke before dawn. The dream was still with him. He stepped outside into the cold, gray light. The air was heavy, damp. He looked north, to the mountains. The clouds were gathering, thick and dark, piling on top of each other. A storm was coming, a big one. He looked at Ada's small, leaning barn. He looked at the roof of her house, where the shingles were curled and missing. The land was about to test them again. He turned back to the house, pushing the door open, just as a low, rumbling growl of thunder echoed from the mountains. He looked at Ada, who was just waking up. "We need to fix the roof," he said. "Now!" As he spoke, he saw something new. On the door of her barn, drawn in black charcoal, was a large, crude X. It was the mark of a bounty hunter, the mark of a man who had been paid to claim a hide. It was Pike's final, silent message. "You are marked. You are prey." The X on the barn door was a raw, black wound in the gray morning light. The air was thick, heavy, and still, holding its breath. The clouds in the north, which had been a distant threat, had now consumed half the sky, a bruised, unmoving wall of purple and black. The world was waiting. Yiska had not slept. He had watched, and he had thought. He had thought about his mother's kindness and his father's death. He had thought about the kiss, a moment of fire and comfort that had felt more real than anything in his life. And he had thought about this land, this patch of dry dirt, and the woman who refused to leave it. When the sun finally rose, it was a weak, sick-looking smear of yellow. Ada came out of the house, her face pale. She, too, had not slept. She saw him standing by the barn, looking at the X. "It is his brand," Yiska said. He did not need to explain whose. "It means he has marked me," she whispered, her hands twisting in her apron. Like cattle. It means he is done talking. He pointed to the roof. We work now. There was no more argument. The time for should and must not was over. He climbed onto the weak roof, and she handed up the few shingles Elias had left to rot behind the barn. They worked in a strange, silent tandem, a warrior and a widow, trying to patch a dying house. They were still there, Yiska hammering the last shingle. When two riders approached, it was not the drunken thugs. It was Logan Pike, dressed in his black town suit, and Sheriff Brody, looking uncomfortable on his horse. Yiska dropped his hammer and slid off the roof, landing silently on the packed earth. He moved to stand beside Ada on the small porch. They did not touch, but they stood as one, facing the men. Pike reined in his horse. He smiled, a thin, polite expression that did not reach his cold eyes. He ignored Yiska, addressing himself only to Ada. Mistress McKenna, a good morning to you, though I fear the weather will turn. Ada said nothing. Her hand, Yiska noted, was clenched into a fist at her side. I have come, Pike continued. As a courtesy, I am a reasonable man. I know you are in a difficult position. He reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. This is a contract. It relieves you of your late husband's debts to me, all of them, and it offers you a cash sum, $300. Enough for a clean start. You can move into town, Mistress McKenna. Get a respectable room at the hotel. You will be under my protection. Of course. The implication hung in the still, heavy air, as foul as the smell of the dead chickens. He was not just offering to buy her land. He was offering to buy her. Ada's voice, when she spoke, was not the whisper he expected. It was low, and it shook with a cold fury. I am not selling, Mr. Pike. Pike's smile faltered. He looked at her as if she were a stubborn animal he was losing patience with. $300 is a generous offer for this property, given its condition. A woman alone, with a child. You cannot possibly manage. I am not alone, Ada said, and she took a half-step closer to Yiska. Pike's eyes flicked to Yiska for the first time. His face darkened. I see. This is poor land, Ada said, her voice rising. My husband is buried on it. I have bled into this dirt, trying to keep it. I have starved on it. It is mine, and I am not selling it. The politeness was gone. Pike's face became a mask of cold, controlled rage. He was not used to being told no. You are a fool, he said, his voice flat. The bank will take this land in less than 30 days. You will get nothing, but perhaps you will not last that long. He turned his head to the sheriff. Sheriff Brody, I believe I mentioned to you that this woman is harboring a hostile, a fugitive from the reservation. Now, Logan, Brody began, shifting in his saddle. It is a simple fact, Pike snapped. He looked back at Ada, his eyes like ice chips. It would be a terrible thing, Ada, a truly terrible thing, if word got back to the fort that you have been consorting with a known savage, giving him food, shelter. He attacked 3 men in town. Who is to say you are not giving him information, details on patrols, troop movements? That is a lie, Ada cried. Is it? Pike gestured at Yiska. He is here, is he not? They call that aiding the enemy? Ada, they call it treason. They hang people for treason, even white women, especially white women who betray their own kind. He had laid his final card. He had named the thing she feared most. Think on it, Pike said. He slowly folded the contract and put it back in his pocket. I will expect your answer. He turned his horse. Sheriff. Brody gave Ada a last, unhappy look. A look that said just do what he says, and then followed his master. They watched them ride away until they were just specks in the distance. The wind began to pick up, a low moan that came from the north. The first fat, cold drops of rain began to fall. Ada turned to Yiska. The fury was gone, replaced by a stark, bottomless terror. "He is right," she said, her voice breaking. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in. "Yiska, you heard him. Treason? They will. They will hang you. And they will hang me. He has twisted this kindness. He has made it into something evil. You have to go now. Ride back to your people. Please. I cannot be the reason you die. I will not have another man's death on my hands." Yiska looked down at her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own. His skin was warm against her cold, trembling fingers. "He does not want me gone, Ada," he said, his voice quiet and steady in the rising wind. "He wants you alone. If I leave now, his men will be here before that storm hits, and you will be alone. He will get what he wants. He will burn this house, and he will take your son, and he will tell the town it was an Indian raid." "But it is my fight," she sobbed. "I am the one he wants." "He wants the land, and he hates me," Yiska said. "And I am not leaving." He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers. "You are not the poison widow. You are not Elias's wife. You are the woman my mother saved. I am not leaving." She looked at him, at the face that was bruised for her. She saw the man who had slept on her floor to protect her. She saw the man who had kissed her with a desperation that matched her own. And she saw the man who had just called her by her own name, as if she were a person, not a rumor. The love for him, the terrifying, new and fragile feeling, burned away the last of her old self, the self that ran. She took a deep, shuddering breath and straightened her back. She took her hand from his arm and nodded. "All right," she said. Her voice was steady now. "But if we stay, we fight. We do not just wait for them. We fight." He nodded. "Go inside. Get the boy. Put food and water in a bag. We stay low." As she turned to the house, the sky ripped open. It was not a rain. It was a solid wall of water, a horizontal flood driven by a wind that screamed. It hit the house like a fist. The world vanished into a roaring, gray chaos. "The mule!" Ada screamed over the wind. "The chickens!" They ran. They fought their way through the driving rain to the small, leaning barn. The wind tore at their clothes, trying to lift them from the ground. Yiska half carried, half dragged her. They managed to get the terrified mule into the barn and the few remaining chickens into their coop. Yiska used his rope, his hands working fast and sure, to brace the groaning barn door. "To the house now," he yelled. They ran back, bending low against the wind. The house, when they fell inside and barred the door, felt like a small, wooden box in the hand of an angry giant. The roof was rattling, the walls groaning. Water was already leaking in 3 places. Jamie was in the corner, on his cot, crying in terror. "Mama, the house is breaking." "We are safe, Jamie," Ada yelled, her voice a strained lie. She pulled him from the bed, wrapping him in a blanket. The storm was a living thing. It was a physical assault. Ada huddled with her son, trying to calm him, but her own heart was pounding. She watched Yiska. He was not afraid. He was alive. His eyes were bright, alert. He moved through the small, dark cabin, checking the windows, wedging a cloth into a crack where the wind whistled through. He was a man of the storm, a man of chaos. He was not a man of fear. And as she watched him, Ada realized she was no longer afraid of being alone. She was terrified of what was in the storm, but she was no longer alone. The storm raged for what felt like an eternity. The world was nothing but the scream of the wind and the deafening pound of the rain on the roof. Then, through the chaos, Yiska froze. He was standing by the window, and he held up his hand. "What?" Ada shouted. "What is it?" "Horses," he said, his voice a low growl. "It is the wind. It is the house." "No." He moved away from the window. His entire body coiled. "I hear them, on the wind." He moved to the hearth, where the small fire she had kept for warmth was sputtering. He grabbed the kettle of water. Yiska, what? He threw the water on the fire. The logs hissed, and the cabin was plunged into a terrifying, absolute darkness. The only light was the occasional, blinding white flash of lightning. Get down, he commanded, his voice a whip crack. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbed Ada and Jamie, and pulled them from the center of the room. He pushed them down onto the dirt floor, against the solid stone base of the fireplace. Stay here. Do not make a sound. A sound. A crash of glass from the far window, the one Yiska had not been able to repair. Another flash of lightning. It lit the room for a split second, illuminating the rain driving in through the broken pane, and it lit the shape of a man's head and shoulders outside. Boom! The rifle shot was deafening. It exploded in the small cabin. Ada screamed. But the shot had not come from outside. It had come from inside. Yiska was at the other window, pressed against the wall. Elias McKenna's old rifle at his shoulder. A yell from outside, cut short. The night, which had already been a nightmare of sound, erupted. Gunfire. 3 rifles, maybe 4, opened up from the darkness. Bullets ripped through the thin wooden walls of the house. Thwack, thwack, ping! A bullet struck the iron stove and screamed off into the darkness. Jamie was screaming, a high, thin sound of pure terror. Mama, mama, make them stop. Ada threw her body over his, covering him, her own face pressed to the dirt floor. She could smell the wet earth and the acrid scent of gunpowder. Yiska was not staying still. He fired once more from the window, then crawled, silent as a shadow, across the floor to the other side of the cabin. He rose to a crouch, waited for a flash of lightning, and fired again. A scream from outside. He is over here! Another flash of lightning. Ada, risking a look, saw something else. A flicker of orange light, a light that was not the sky. The barn, she screamed, her voice cracking. Yiska, they are trying to burn the barn, the mule. It is a trick, Yiska yelled back over the gunfire. They want us to come out, stay down. But Ada saw a new movement. A dark shape, hunched against the rain, was running. Not toward the barn, but toward the small lean-to against the house, the granary, where her flour, her seed, her tiny store of food was kept. The man was carrying a torch, the wind whipping the flames. Rage. A sudden, hot, and pure rage burned through Ada's fear. That was her son's food. That was the food he had bought for her. She scrambled on her hands and knees, keeping low toward the wall where Elias's old shotgun hung on 2 wooden pegs. She pulled it down. It was heavy, oily. She broke the breech. She fumbled in the dark, her fingers finding the box of shells on the shelf. She jammed 2 in. Yiska fired again. The bullet tore through the door. The man with the torch was at the granary. He stooped, shoving the flames into the dry wood beneath the eaves. Ada rose to her knees. She crawled to the broken window. She rested the heavy double barrel on the shattered sill. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely aim, but her eyes were clear. She aimed at the stooping shadow. She pulled both triggers. The boom of the shotgun was apocalyptic. It was louder than the thunder, louder than the wind. It filled the tiny cabin with smoke, the flash momentarily blinding her. The recoil slammed her back, her shoulders screaming in pain, and she fell back against the wall. Outside, the man with the torch did not yell. He did not move. He was simply thrown backward, a boneless shape against the driving rain, and vanished. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Even the attackers, stunned by the cannon blast from the house, stopped firing. Yiska crawled back to her in the darkness. He put his hand on her shoulder. He looked at her, then at the smoking shotgun, then out the window. In the next flash of lightning, she saw his face. It was not surprise. It was a fierce, proud respect. "Good shot, warrior," he breathed. The silence was over. The attackers were furious. A hail of bullets ripped through the cabin, a desperate, angry volley. They were not aiming now. They were just shooting, trying to kill whatever was inside. Zing! A bullet shrieked off the fireplace stones, inches from Ada's head. Thwip! Another bullet punched through the wall, right where Jamie's cot stood. It tore through the blanket and buried itself in the wall, a foot above where his head would have been. Jamie shrieked, "Mama, it is in the house! It is in the house!" Ada grabbed him, pulling him under her, shielding him with her whole body. That was too close. Yiska was at the other window, reloading the rifle. He looked at the small, torn box of cartridges on the floor. He could see there were only a few left. "Ada," he yelled, his voice urgent. "They know. They are waiting. We do not have enough bullets. They will wait until we are quiet, and then they will rush the house." He looked up. A piece of the roof, loosened by the wind and the bullets, tore free. Rain poured in. "This house will not last," he said. He made the decision, the only one he could. He crawled to her, his face close, his eyes burning in the dark. "Listen to me. Bar the door after I am gone. Do not open it, for anyone, until the sun comes up. Do you understand?" "What?" she screamed, grabbing his shirt. "No, Yiska. No, you cannot. They will kill you. There are too many." "They will kill us all if I stay," he said, his voice a raw, hard command. "They are focused on this house. I will give them something else to look at. A different target. No, I will not let you. I will fight." He grabbed her face, his hands hard on her cheeks. He silenced her, not with a kiss, but with an intensity that was just as intimate. "You are fighting. You are a warrior, Ada McKenna. You protect your son. Now, bar the door." Before she could scream again, he was gone. He was a shadow moving to the back door, the one that faced the dark, empty hills. He lifted the latch. "Bar it," he commanded. And he slipped out, vanishing into the black, roaring, rain-lashed nightmare. Sobbing, Ada scrambled to the door. She dropped the heavy wooden bar into its cradle. She was sealed in. She was alone. She crawled back to Jamie, pulling him from the fireplace and dragging him under the heavy, oaken table. "We are safe, baby," she whispered, her voice a lie. She listened. The gunfire continued, but it was different. It was scattered. A shot from near the burning barn. An answer from the hills far to the left, Yiska. Another shot from the front porch. An answer from the creek bed far to the right. He was moving, a ghost, a phantom in the storm, drawing them away from the house, drawing them into his world, the world of rocks and rain and darkness. The shots grew fainter, further away, one, then another, then a long silence, then one last distant pop. And then nothing. Nothing but the wind, nothing but the rain, nothing but the pounding of Ada's own heart. She held her son, rocking him in the dark. The gunfire had stopped. She did not know if Yiska was alive. She did not know if he was dead. She did not know if the men were gone, or if they were out there in the rain, waiting. She was alone in the dark, her son in her arms, and the silence that followed the last shot was the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. The silence that came after the last gunshot was worse than the storm. It was a dead, waiting silence, filled only with the roar of the wind, the drumming of the rain, and the sound of Ada's own heart hammering in her throat. She held Jamie under the table, her body covering his, her own shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She stayed that way for an hour, then another. The wind died first, its scream lowering to a wounded moan, and then to a cold whisper. The rain slowed, from a flood to a drip. She did not know when she fell asleep, her cheek pressed to the cold, damp dirt floor. Light woke her. Not the bright, clear light of morning, but a weak, gray, watery light that filtered in through the broken window. The cabin was a wreck. The floor was covered in mud and plaster. Water dripped from a new, jagged hole in the roof. Jamie was still asleep, his small face pale and tear-stained in his mother's arms. She was stiff, cold, and filled with a dread so profound it felt like an illness. Yiska. Slowly, painfully. She crawled out from under the table. She lifted the heavy wooden bar from the door. The sound of it scraping in the bracket was loud, an obscenity in the stillness. She opened the door. The world was gone. In its place was a sea of red, viscous mud. The sky was a low, bruised gray. Her fence was shattered, the rails scattered like kindling. The world smelled of wet earth, ozone, and something else. Smoke. Her barn. She looked at the barn. It was still standing, but the entire northeast corner was a blackened, skeletal ruin, still smoking in the damp air. The X was gone, consumed by the fire. Then she saw them. In the middle of the yard, half buried in the mud, lay a man. He was face down. It was the one she had shot. Further out, near the creek bed, was another body, twisted against a rock. She put her hand to her mouth, a wave of sickness rising in her throat. She had done this. She had killed him. "Mama," Jamie whispered from the doorway, his eyes wide with terror as he looked at the dead man. Is he sleeping?" Ada had no answer. She was scanning the hills, the creek, the ruined fence line, her eyes desperate, searching for a black stallion. There was nothing, just the two bodies, the mud, and the smoking ruin of her barn. He was dead. He had gone out there to save them, and they had killed him. She had let him go. She was the poison widow, after all. She brought death to every man who touched her. The thought was a cold, sharp stone in her gut. She was turning, a hollow, empty shell, to pull her son back inside, when she saw it. Movement! Far down the creek, a single, dark shape, moving with a terrible, slow weariness. It was the black stallion. The horse was covered in mud, its head hanging low, and on its back, Yiska was slumped forward, his arms wrapped around the horse's neck. Ada did not make a sound. She just ran. She flew from the porch, her feet sinking deep in the mud. She slipped and fell, catching herself on her hands, and scrambled up again, her skirt heavy with grime. He saw her coming. He tried to dismount, but his body would not obey. He slid, more than climbed, from the stallion's back, landing hard on his feet but staggering, catching himself against the horse's flank. "Yiska!" she cried, grabbing his arm. He was a creature of mud. It was impossible to tell where he was hurt. He was soaked to the bone and shaking with a deep, bone-rattling cold. He had a bloody gash on his forearm, wrapped in a torn piece of his own hide shirt. He looked at her, his eyes barely visible, and she saw in them an exhaustion so deep it went to his very soul. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her hands fluttering over him. "A cut," he breathed, his voice a raw rasp. "Just a cut. The horse is tired." He looked past her, at the house, at the dead men. His eyes were sharp, even through the weariness. "They are gone. I led them on a chase. Through the rocks. They thought I was 10 men. I fired from the ridge, then from the creek. They scattered, fled back to town." He had made them shoot at shadows until their courage broke. Relief washed over Ada, so potent and so sudden that her knees buckled. She would have fallen if he had not caught her. His good arm wrapped around her waist, holding her up. They stood there for a long moment, clinging to each other in the mud. Two survivors, the living and the half-dead, breathing in the cold, clean air. They stood there for less than a minute. From the ridge, the one Pike had come over, came a new sound, not the wind, a sound that made Yiska's head snap up, his exhaustion instantly replaced by a cold, sharp alertness. A bugle call, clear and sharp in the morning air. "Soldiers," he said, his voice flat. He did not let go of her. They came over the rise, just as Pike had, A line of blue coats, 12 of them, their horses fresh, their carbines held ready. They were led by an officer in a clean, dark blue coat, a man with a hard, square jaw and weary, assessing eyes. He rode into the yard, his gaze sweeping over the scene, taking in every detail in a single, practiced glance: the smoldering barn, the bullet-riddled house, the 2 dead white men in the mud. And then his gaze landed on Yiska, a Comanche warrior, caked in mud that looked like war paint, holding a rifle, his arm around a white woman. The officer's face hardened. He was Captain Harrington. "Troopers!" Harrington's voice was a bark of command. "Take that hostile now!" In a single, terrifying motion, 12 rifles were cocked and leveled, 12 black muzzles, all aimed directly at Yiska's chest. Yiska did not move. He did not drop his rifle. He did not release Ada. He just stood, his body tensing, waiting for the impact. "No!" Ada screamed. She broke free from his hold, not to run, but to plant herself directly in front of him. A small, mud-soaked shield. She spread her arms wide, her back pressed against his chest. "Ma'am, get out of the way!" Harrington shouted, his pistol now in his hand. "We are here to rescue you." "How, rescue me?" Ada laughed, a wild, high-pitched sound that was half sob, half rage. "You are too late, Captain, and you are aiming at the wrong man." Harrington frowned, lowering his pistol. This was not the scene he had been told to expect. "Ma'am, step aside. We have a report, filed an hour ago, of a Comanche raid, that this warrior and his band attacked your ranch, murdered your hands, and took you captive." "A report? A report from whom?" Ada spat the words. "Was it from Logan Pike, the man who sent these animals?" She spun, pointing a shaking, mud-caked finger at the man she had killed. "Does that man look like a Comanche to you, Captain?" The soldiers looked at the dead man. He was white. He wore cowboy boots and a stained vest. "Ma'am," Harrington said, dismounting. He was confused, and he did not like being confused. "You will not arrest him," Ada said, her voice dropping to a low, fierce growl that Yiska had never heard. "He saved my life. He saved my son's life. If you want to shoot him, you will have to shoot through me first." The yard was silent. The neighbors who had ridden in behind the soldiers, Judd Morrison, his face pale, and young Tom Hartley, his hands black from the forge, stared, their mouths open. Harrington was no fool. He was a career soldier, and he smelled a lie. "Ma'am," he said, holding up his hand, "lower your arms, and tell me what happened. From the beginning." And so she did. The words, dammed up for a year, for 10 years, poured out of her. She told them everything. She told them about the store, the threats, the harassment. She told them about the X on her barn. She told them about Pike's visit yesterday. "He offered me $300 for my land," she said, her voice ringing in the cold air. "And protection. And when I refused, he told me he would have me arrested for treason, for harboring this man, the man who was helping me patch my roof before the storm." The soldiers were listening. Tom Hartley was listening. She pointed to the bodies. "These are Pike's men. They came in the night, in the storm. They set my barn on fire. They shot at my son. I killed that one." She raised the heavy shotgun she had left on the porch. "I killed him, and Yiska, this man, he went out into that storm to save us. He led them away. He fought them alone while I hid with my son. He is the only reason we are alive." The poison widow's story was finally told, in the open, in front of the law. Harrington's face was grim. He looked at the bullet holes in the house. They were all coming in. He looked at the body. He looked at Ada, who was shaking but defiant. He had been sent on a fool's errand. He had been used. "Pike," he said, his voice tight with a cold fury, "reported an Indian raid." Before he could say another word, there was a new sound. More horses. Yiska, who had been standing silent, tensed. This was not the army. Over the same rise, a second group of riders appeared, 5 Comanche warriors. They were not in paint, but they were armed for war. They were led by the old chief, and Kills with a Knife rode at his side. They reined in, their horses shifting nervously at the smell of the soldiers and the blood. Their faces were like stone. They took in the scene, the blue coats, the dead white men, the shattered ranch, and Yiska, standing, with the white woman at his side. The chief's gaze was heavy, full of a terrible disappointment. He spoke, not in English, but in the tongue of the people, his voice carrying across the yard. "Yiska," the chief said, "you were told to come home. The council is angry, the children are hungry, and we find you here. You have made war for the white man, against the white man." Kills with a Knife spat into the mud. He has joined them. He fights for a white woman. He has forgotten his father's blood. He brings shame on the people. This was not a white man's fight, Yiska answered in his language, his voice raw. This was Pike's fight. It does not matter, the chief's voice rose. You have brought the soldiers here. You have brought this trouble. You are a warrior of the people, not the bodyguard for her. He looked at Ada with open contempt. You will come with us, now, or you are no longer one of us. You will be cast out. The world stopped. Yiska was trapped, in front of him. 12 army rifles, held by men who had been told he was a murderer. Behind him, the 5 warriors who held his entire life, his identity in their hands. At his side, a woman and a child who would be dead by nightfall if he left. What is he saying? Captain Harrington demanded, his hand on his pistol again. Tell them to stand down. The chief looked at Harrington, then back at Yiska. Choose. Yiska stood in the center of the muddy yard, the focal point of 3 warring worlds. He looked at the chief, at the man who had been a second father to him. My father, Yiska said, his voice clear in the Comanche tongue, was killed by a man named Pike. This woman's home is being stolen by a man named Pike. It is the same man, the same greed, the same snake. He turned his head slightly, his gaze moving to Captain Harrington. He spoke, but he was still addressing his chief. He wants her land. He wants her water. He turned back to the chief. It is our water, too, Uncle. It is the spring that feeds the lower creek. When he dams her spring, our hunting grounds will dry to dust. He does not care if the skin is red or white. He only cares for this. He rubbed his fingers together. He takes her land today. He will take ours tomorrow. The chief hesitated. The logic was clear. He looked at Kills with a Knife, who was struggling. The old warrior knew Yiska was right about Pike. But the shame... She is a cursed woman, he muttered. She is bad luck. Yiska had made his choice. He remembered his father's spirit in the dream. This is a path your people will not understand. So be it. He planted his feet in the mud. He was not a Comanche. He was not a white man's enemy. He was just a man, standing on the earth. He spoke, and this time he spoke in English, his voice clear and ringing, so that all 3 sides could understand. He looked at his chief. I will not go. He looked at Captain Harrington. I will not be arrested. He rested his hand on his own rifle, but he did not raise it. He looked at Ada, who was watching him, her entire soul in her eyes. I will stand here, he said to them all, on this land, with this woman. His gaze locked with the chief's. If you wish to call me a traitor, then that is what I am. His gaze locked with Harrington's. If you wish to call me a murderer, then you are a fool. He took a deep breath, his voice dropping to a final, deadly quiet that was more powerful than any shout. I will stand here, and anyone, white, red, soldier, anyone who wants to cross this land to kill more innocent people, must cross over my body first. He had thrown down his life. The muddy yard was silent. The soldiers, the Comanche, the neighbors, they all stared. Captain Harrington looked at the chief. The chief looked at Ada. And Ada looked at Yiska, her heart so full of terror and a love so fierce she thought she might die from it. The standoff was absolute. The silence in the muddy yard was as taut as a bowstring. 12 army rifles were aimed at one man. 5 Comanche bows were aimed at 12 soldiers. And in the center, Yiska stood, a human lightning rod, drawing all the hatred of a divided world to one small patch of mud. Captain Harrington was a man of order. This was chaos, and he did not like it. He looked at the chief's stony face. He looked at the defiant, half-dead Comanche at the woman's side, and he looked at the 2 dead white men. He had been sent here on a lie. "Stand down, troopers," Harrington ordered, his voice sharp. The rifles did not lower, but the tension in the soldiers' arms eased. He looked at the chief. "I do not speak your tongue, sir, but you will take your warriors and you will leave this property. I will not have a war in my jurisdiction." He looked at Yiska. "My report will state that I found 2 armed men, killed in an apparent defense of this household. My quarrel is not with you. As long as you stay on this property, you set 1 foot in Red Rock, I will arrest you. Understood." The chief stared at Yiska, his eyes filled with a deep, cold sorrow. He had heard the translation of Yiska's defiance. He had lost a warrior. He raised his hand, a sharp, cutting motion. The Comanche warriors turned their horses, their face masks of contempt, and rode back over the ridge, leaving Yiska utterly alone, an outcast. Yiska watched them go. He felt the cut, the final separation from his people, like a physical wound. "Ma'am," Harrington said, tipping his hat to Ada. He looked at the smoking barn, at her, at the muddy, defiant Indian, and he felt a weariness. You have a hard road." He turned his patrol. "We are done here." The soldiers rode away, leaving a different kind of silence. The neighbors, Judd Morrison and Tom Hartley, lingered. Morrison looked terrified, as if he had just seen the end of the world. He scrambled onto his wagon and fled back to town. Tom Hartley remained. The young blacksmith walked his horse forward, his honest face full of pain. "He will not let this stand." "Yiska," Tom said, "you shamed him. You beat him. The law just let you go. He will not let it stand." "I know," Yiska said. "What will you do?" "We will fight," Ada said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady. "This is my home. We will fight." Tom Hartley looked at her, at the shotgun in her hand, at the dead man she had killed. This was not the poison widow. This was someone new. He nodded, grimly. "God help you both." He turned and rode away. In Red Rock, the news hit the saloon like a bottle of whiskey thrown against a wall. Logan Pike was sitting at his usual table, waiting for the report of Ada's arrest and the Indian's death. Instead, Judd Morrison burst in, babbling about a standoff, about the army backing down, about Ada claiming he, Pike, had sent the men. Pike did not get angry. He got cold. He had been publicly shamed. A lone Indian and a half-crazy widow had defied him, and the United States Army had let them. His power, the power he had built on fear, was cracking. He walked to the bar and laid a stack of gold coins down. "Drinks for everyone," he said, his voice calm. "It seems our town is in grave danger." He let the whiskey work. He let the rumors fly. "A band of hostiles, led by that buck Yiska. They have fortified the McKenna Ranch. The army is too cowardly to act. The sheriff is afraid. They killed 2 good, honest men who were just checking on the poor widow." He went to the church. He spoke with the old fire and brimstone pastor. And that Sunday, the sermon was not about forgiveness. It was about the abomination of a white woman lying with a heathen. It was about the duty of Christian men to cleanse their community. By nightfall, Pike had his posse. It was not a legal body. It was a lynch mob. He had 20 men, drunk on whiskey and self-righteousness, all of them owing him money or fearing his power. They checked their rifles. They would ride at dawn. They would wipe that ranch off the face of the earth. The news came to the ranch on the wind. Tom Hartley rode out at dusk, his horse lathered. He has a posse, Yiska, 20 men. They are coming at dawn to clear out the nest. Ada, Yiska, and 2 young warriors were all that stood against them. The 2 boys, barely 20 winters old, Hawk and Little Bear, had defied the chief. They had slipped out of the camp, their hearts loyal to Yiska, their spirits hungry for a true fight against the man who had starved them. They had worked all day. They had dug shallow trenches behind the woodpile. They had boarded the broken window. They had brought the mule into the house. Ada listened to Tom, her face pale but set. "I have run all my life," she said, her voice quiet. "From my father, from my husband. I am not running anymore. This is my home." But Yiska looked at Jamie. The boy was huddled by the cold hearth, watching the armed men, his eyes wide with a terror that had become his normal life. Yiska knew they could not win, not here. 20 men against 4. They would be surrounded. The house would be burned, and they would be shot as they ran. Pike wanted to destroy the evidence, and the evidence was the house, the woman, and the Indian. He had to change the battlefield. He turned to Ada. "He is a child. He cannot be here." Ada's resolve broke. She looked at Jamie. No, where can he go? The town they will kill him." "My people," Yiska said. He looked at Hawk. "You will take him. Ride fast. To the chief. Tell him Yiska sends his own heart. Tell him to protect the boy in the name of my father." The chief had cast him out, but he was still his father's son. He was still Comanche. The blood debt was real. The chief would not harm a child. The farewell was the hardest thing Ada had ever done. She knelt in the mud, holding her son's small, thin body. "You must be brave, Jamie," she whispered, her voice thick with tears she would not shed. "You will ride with Hawk. You will be safe. You will be like a Comanche warrior. Like Yiska." The boy, sensing the finality, clung to her. "I do not want to go. I want to stay with you, Mama." "I will come for you," she promised, a promise she did not know if she could keep. She kissed his forehead. "I love you. Now go. Be brave." Yiska lifted the boy onto Hawk's horse. "Ride as the wind," he said in his tongue. "Do not stop. Do not look back." Hawk nodded, his face grim, and the horse disappeared into the twilight. Ada watched until he was gone, a part of her soul torn away. She turned back to Yiska, her face a mask of grief. "Now," Yiska said, his voice hard. "We do not wait for him. We choose the ground." He looked at Little Bear. "Go. Take the challenge." Yiska went to his stallion. From the horse's mane, he pulled a single, perfect tail feather from the red-tailed hawk. He gave it to the young warrior. "Ride to Red Rock," Yiska commanded. "Ride to the saloon. Give this to Pike. Tell him the warrior you hunt is not a woman. He is not a child. He waits for you at Devil's Jaw Canyon. Come and face me, if you are a man. Or does the great Logan Pike only fight women and burn houses?" It was a naked taunt, a challenge to Pike's manhood, in front of the entire town. "Go," Yiska said. "Then ride to the canyon. We will be there." Little Bear grinned, a wolf's grin, and was gone. Ada looked at Yiska in the growing darkness. "Devil's Jaw, Yiska. That is a box canyon. There is no way out." "There is one way," he said. "Up." He turned to her. You should not come. You can hide. Go to your son." Ada picked up her shotgun. She checked the shells, her hands steady now. "You said we walk beside the ones we choose. I have chosen. You cannot win this alone." Yiska looked at her, at the small, fierce woman in her mud-stained dress. He nodded. "Then let us ride." They left the ranch, the house, the broken fences, the graves. They rode hard for the high country, for the place of jagged rock and shadows. In Red Rock, Pike was enraged. Tom Hartley had heard the posse was riding and, in a last desperate act, had ridden to Captain Harrington. "You have to stop him. It is a massacre." Harrington's face was thunderous. He had been made a fool of twice. "I will not engage him. Hartley, that is a civil matter, but I will observe. My report will be the truth this time, and God help him if I see a crime." He gathered a small patrol of 6 men. Just as Pike was preparing to mount, Little Bear had ridden his horse onto the saloon boardwalk. He threw the feather at Pike's feet. He shouted the challenge, his voice echoing in the street. Pike's face went purple, a savage, daring to challenge him, in front of his men. "Devil's jaw," he laughed, a loud, barking sound. "He has just built his own coffin." He looked at his posse. "He wants a man's fight. We will give it to him. Let's ride." He led his 20 men out of town, a ragged, drunken army, riding for a killing. Captain Harrington and Tom Hartley followed at a distance, 2 shadows against the rising moon. Yiska stood at the mouth of the canyon. The wind was cold, whistling through the rock spires. He looked up, a single eagle, a ghost in the moonlight, circled high above. It was the sign. The ancestors were watching. He bowed his head. He whispered to the black stallion, his hand on its neck. He whispered to the cold stones, "Spirits of this place, if I die tonight, let it be the last death. Let the woman and the boy, let them be free." Ada stood beside him, her shotgun heavy in her hands. Little Bear was high on the ridge to the left, his bow ready. They were 3 against 20. "They are coming," Ada whispered. She could hear the thunder of their ride. "Get to the rocks," Yiska ordered. "Do not fire until I do." Pike and his men clattered into the canyon, a noisy, confident mob. "Spread out," Pike yelled. "Find the heathen, I want his scalp." A shot, not a rifle. A thwack. A man at the front of the group gasped, a feathered shaft suddenly protruding from his throat. He toppled from his horse. Little Bear had struck. "Ambush!" a man screamed. "He is in the rocks!" They opened fire, blasting at the shadows. The canyon exploded with noise. Bullets ricocheted off the walls. The sound of an angry god's hammer. Yiska did not fire. He waited. He let them waste their ammunition. He let the panic grow. He, Ada, and Little Bear were ghosts, melting from shadow to shadow. Another arrow. Another man fell, screaming, his leg pinned to his saddle. "Damn you, show yourself," Pike roared, dismounting, his repeating rifle in his hand. Yiska moved, a blur of motion, to a new position. He saw Pike, exposed in the moonlight. He raised his rifle. He had him. He could end it. He could kill the brother of the man who had killed his father. He fired. The shot did not hit Pike. It struck the rock just above his head, showering him with stone chips. Pike roared in rage and fired back, emptying his rifle at the shadow. Yiska was already gone, running. "How much land?" Yiska's voice echoed from the walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "How much land is enough? Pike, how much blood do you need to wash your own hands?" "Come out and fight, you coward!" Pike bellowed, reloading, his hands shaking with rage. "You are the coward." Yiska's voice came from a new spot. "You, who hunts women. You, who rode with your brother to slaughter sleeping families." "My brother," Pike breathed, his face twisting. He was a fool, but he knew how to cleanse the land. "Is that what you call it, cleansing?" Yiska asked. "Or are you just afraid of what you have done?" "I am afraid of nothing," Pike screamed. "Least of all a red animal, I will own this valley, and I will kill every last Indian in it until I can sleep at night, until I am not reminded of what I had to do." He had said it. The truth. He was haunted. "He is over there," a man yelled, seeing Yiska's shadow. A volley of shots. Yiska was hit. He felt the fire sear across his side, a glancing blow, but it knocked him off balance. He fell, his rifle skittering away. Pike saw it. "He is hit," He is mine. Pike charged forward, leaving his men, climbing the rocks toward where Yiska had fallen. He saw Yiska, unarmed, clutching his side. Pike grinned, a terrible, victorious grin. He raised his rifle. A boom, the shotgun blast from Ada, hidden 50 yards away, struck the rifle, knocking it from Pike's hands, splintering the stock. Pike looked at his empty, stinging hands, then at Ada, then at Yiska. He was trapped. His men were too far below. He roared, a sound of pure animal rage, and he drew his knife. Then I will kill you both with my hands. He charged at Yiska. Yiska, wounded, his side on fire, met the charge. He did not have his rifle, but he had his knife. But he did not use it. He used his body. He sidestepped Pike's clumsy, raging lunge. He grabbed the man's wrist, the one with the knife. He used Pike's own momentum, and in a fluid motion of Comanche wrestling, he spun the larger man around. They were at the edge. The canyon floor was 100 feet below. Pike teetered. His eyes went wide with a sudden, primal terror. He dropped his knife, his free hand grabbing at Yiska's shirt. He was falling, and Yiska caught him. He had him, his enemy, the source of all his pain, the man who had tried to kill the woman he cared for. He held him by the front of his shirt, Pike's boots dangling over the abyss. Pike's face was a mask of disbelief, then terror. Help me, please. I will give you anything. Yiska held him there. He held the man's life in one hand. He could feel the blood, his own blood, running hot down his side. He looked into Pike's eyes. He saw the murderer. He saw the haunted man. He saw the terrified child. This was the moment, the final test. Revenge for his father, or something else. He remembered his father's spirit on the horse. He remembered Ada. He remembered his mother's kindness. He could not be this man. He could not be a murderer, not even of a murderer. But he could not save him, either. This man would never stop. He would come back. He would kill Ada. He would kill Jamie. He would kill them all. Yiska did not push. He did not throw. He did not exert any force at all. He just let go. He opened his hand. He released his grip on Pike's shirt. He released the hate. He released the past. Pike looked at him, his eyes wide with a final, terrible understanding. And then he was gone. His scream was short, cut off by the final, sickening crash on the rocks below. Yiska stood at the edge, breathing hard, his side screaming in pain. He had not killed him. He had simply refused to save him. The canyon was silent. Pike's men, below, had seen it. And on the ridge, 100 yards away, Captain Harrington lowered his field glasses. He, too, had seen it. He had seen Pike charge. He had seen the struggle. He had seen Pike hanging. And he had seen Yiska let him go. He turned to Tom Hartley, who was staring, his face pale. Well, the captain said, his voice grim. It seems Mr. Pike had an accident, a terrible, tragic accident. He turned to his troopers. My report will reflect that he fell from the cliff while pursuing a fugitive, a great loss to the community. He looked back at the canyon, at the small, lone figure of the Comanche, and the woman who was now scrambling up the rocks toward him. The case, Captain Harrington said, is closed. Ada scrambled up the last of the rocks, her hands raw, her breath tearing at her lungs. Yiska was on his knees, one hand pressed to his side, the other braced on the stone ledge. The moonlight was cruel, showing the dark, spreading stain on his shirt. Yiska, she breathed, falling to her knees beside him. He looked up. His face was pale, drawn with pain, but his eyes were clear. He had seen Pike fall. He had seen the past, his father's ghost, fall into the darkness with him. You are hurt, she whispered, her hands reaching for the wound. It is a scratch, he lied, his voice tight. She did not argue. She put her arm around his waist, and he put his good arm over her shoulder. Below them, in the canyon, Pike's men, leaderless and terrified, were scrambling onto their horses. A disorganized rabble fleeing the haunted canyon and the Indian who had called down its judgment. Little Bear, the young warrior, ran up to them, his face a mix of awe and worry. "You are hit." "Help me with him," Ada commanded, her voice firm. Together, the small woman and the young warrior supported Yiska. They made their way, slow step by agonizing step, down the rocky path to where their horses were hidden. At the mouth of the canyon, Captain Harrington and his patrol were waiting. They were not pointing their rifles. They were sitting on their horses, silent witnesses. Tom Hartley was with them, his face pale in the moonlight. As Yiska, Ada, and Little Bear emerged from the shadows, Harrington watched them. He watched Ada's hand, possessive and gentle, on Yiska's waist. He watched the way Yiska leaned on her, a show of trust he had never seen between the two races. Ada stopped, facing the soldiers, her body still half shielding Yiska. She was ready for the next fight. Harrington just looked at Yiska's bleeding side. He looked at the bodies being recovered by his men down in the canyon. He looked at the last of Pike's posse fleeing in the distance. "My report will state," he said, his voice hard, "that Mr. Pike, in a state of drunken agitation, pursued a false claim, and in the ensuing darkness, met with a tragic accident. These other men," he gestured to the bodies, "were killed resisting a lawful investigation. It was a lie, but it was a clean one. It closed the books." He looked directly at Ada. "He is bleeding. Ma'am, you should get him tended to." He turned his horse. "The matter is concluded." He and his men rode away, their duty done. Tom Hartley rode up. He looked at Yiska with a new respect. He is gone." "He is gone," Yiska confirmed. "The town," Tom said. It will not know what to do." "It will learn," Ada said. She turned to Yiska. Little Bear was bringing the black stallion, and there, in the open, in the moonlight, with Tom Hartley and Little Bear as witnesses, Ada did what she had wanted to do since she first saw him standing by her barn. She put both her arms around his neck, buried her face in his shoulder, and held on. She held on to him, this man who had bled for her, this man who had been cast out for her. He was alive. He was hers. Yiska, his body screaming in pain, wrapped his good arm around her and held her just as tightly, his face buried in her hair. It was not a kiss. It was more. It was an anchor. It was a promise made in blood and shadow, a public declaration that had no need for words. The ride back to the ranch was long and slow. They left the ruin of the house and went to the barn. The one part that was still half standing, Ada made a bed of clean hay. She tore strips from her own petticoat. She cleaned Yiska's wound. The bullet had grazed him, tearing a long, deep furrow along his ribs. It was not in him, but it had taken a great deal of blood. He lay back in the hay, his skin feverish, and for the first time, he let her take care of him. He slept. The next day, Captain Harrington sat in his office and wrote his report. He described a misunderstanding fueled by whiskey and Pike's overzealous nature. He noted the illegal posse. He confirmed Ada McKenna's testimony. He painted Pike as a bully who had finally pushed too hard and met his end by an act of God at Devil's Jaw. The report was sent by courier to the fort. Red Rock, when the news hit, did not mourn. It held its breath. The king was dead. The heavy boot was off its neck. For a day, no one spoke of it. Then, slowly, the story started. Judd Morrison was heard complaining to a traveling salesman about how Pike had forced him to extend credit he could not afford, how Pike had threatened to foreclose on him. 2 ranchers, who had lost their water rights to Pike, were seen in the saloon, buying a quiet drink for each other. They spoke, just loud enough. of how Pike's fences had mysteriously moved 10 yards onto their land 2 years ago. The old pastor, his chief benefactor gone, gave a sermon on the unpredictable nature of God's judgment, his fire and brimstone suddenly sounding weak and hollow. The rumor of the poison widow did not die, but it fractured. People now remembered Elias McKenna. They remembered his drunken rages, his cruelty. They looked at Ada, who had stood her ground, who had killed a man in self-defense, who had been defended by an Indian. And they were confused. The woman who had been a pariah was now a curiosity, and, to a few, like Tom Hartley, she was a hero. On the third day, Captain Harrington did something unusual. He rode out, not toward the fort, but toward the Comanche reservation. He went with only a single scout. He requested a parley with the chief. The chief met him on the open plain, between their two worlds. "Pike is dead," Harrington said, getting straight to the point. The chief nodded. "I have heard. The wind carries news." "He was a bad man," Harrington said. "A cancer on this land, for whites and for your people. I have read the old reports, the complaints about him, about his brother. They were ignored." He paused. "The man you cast out, Yiska, he stood against Pike. He stood for what was right, not for what was white." The chief was silent, his old face unreadable. "I cannot change the reservation," Harrington said. "I am a soldier, but that spring, the one on the McKenna land, it feeds the creek that borders your territory. Pike was damming it. I have seen it." He made his offer. "I will recommend to the agent that your people be given grazing and water rights along that creek. All of it. In exchange," the chief said, his voice dry, "we do not attack your wagons." "It is a start," Harrington said. The chief looked at the captain. He was not a fool. This soldier was offering a truce, a practical peace, and he was offering it because of Yiska. He looked back at his own hungry camp. His people needed water. They needed a new way. "Yiska," the chief said, as if to himself. He did not fight like a warrior. He fought like a leader. He looked at Harrington. "You will have your peace, and the water will be for the people." He rode away, his mind full of a new, complex thought. The warrior he had cast out had not been weakened by the white woman. He had been made smarter. He had found a way to win a war without a massacre. He had saved them all. A week later, Yiska was mending the fence. His side was still bound, but the fever was gone. He moved with a stiff grace, his strength returning. He saw her walking out across the land, toward the low hill where a single, sad wooden cross stood. He watched her go. Ada stood before the grave of Elias McKenna. It was a mound of stones, the cross already leaning. She had felt nothing when he died, only a cold, hollow relief. For the past year, she had lived in terror of his ghost, of the memory of his hand, his voice, his smell. She looked at the grave now. She felt nothing, just an empty space. "You were a cruel man, Elias," she said, her voice quiet. "I was afraid of you, and I hated you. I hated you for so long. I forgot who I was. I became the thing you hated." She looked back toward the ranch, where she could see Yiska's dark head bent over his work. "But I am not that person anymore," she said. "You do not control me. Your memory does not control me. I am not Elias's widow. I am Ada." She reached for the thin gold band on her left hand. It was loose, her fingers thin from hard work and hunger. She had never taken it off. It was a brand, just like Pike's ex. She twisted it, pulling it over her knuckle. She held it in her palm, a small, dull circle of gold. It represented a decade of fear, of pain, of silence. She knelt and, with her bare hands, she dug a small hole in the dirt at the base of the cross. She dropped the ring into it. She covered it with earth, tamping it down. She was burying her past. She was burying the poison. When she stood up, her hand felt light. She felt light. She walked back to the ranch, not as a widow, but as a woman. The next day, Hawk returned. He did not come alone. Jamie was sitting in front of him on the horse, wearing a small, beaded necklace Yiska recognized. The boy saw the ranch, saw his mother on the porch, and he let out a yell. "Mama, Mama, I am home." Hawk let him slide to the ground, and the boy ran, his small legs pumping, launching himself into Ada's arms. She held him, burying her face in his hair, tears of pure joy running down her cheeks. "Oh, Jamie, my baby, my brave boy." Jamie wriggled free, his face bright. He saw Yiska, who was standing back, watching, a small, rare smile on his face. The boy ran to him. He did not stop, but threw his arms around Yiska's legs, hugging him tight. "Yiska, you are here. Hawk said you won. He said you fought the bad men. Did you win the war?" Yiska put his hand on the boy's head, his heart aching with a feeling he had no name for. He knelt, wincing at the pull on his side. So he was eye to eye with the boy. "It was not a war, little one," he said, his voice gentle. "It was a fight, but not for victory." "But you beat them. You beat Mr. Pike." "Mr. Pike is gone," Yiska said. "But we did not win a war. We protected our home. That is all. There is no victory in fighting, Jamie, only in protecting what you love." Jamie looked at him, his brow furrowed, trying to understand the difference. Then his face brightened, as if he had grasped the most important part. "So, you are staying. You will stay here. With me and Mama, you will protect us." The question was so simple, so pure, it hung in the air between them. Ada, who had been watching, froze. Her heart stopped. It was the one question she had been too afraid to ask. Yiska looked at Jamie. He looked at Ada. He did not have an answer. That evening, the sun was a magnificent, bloody smear in the west. The sky was clear, the air was cool, the land was at peace. Yiska sat on the top step of the porch, sharpening his knife. Ada came and sat on the step below him, not touching, but close. They watched the color fade from the sky. "He is asleep," she said. He asked you a question." "I heard him," Yiska said, his hands still. The silence between them stretched, filled with all the things they could not say. "My people," Yiska said at last, his voice low. I am outcast, but the chief, he sent Hawk, he sent the necklace. It is a sign. He understands, but I do not have a place there, not now." "And here," Ada whispered. "What place do you have here?" "I am a Comanche," he said. "I am not a man who lives in a box of wood. I am not a man who digs the earth. I am a man of the horse, of the wind." "I know," she said, her heart sinking. He looked at her profile against the last light. "And you," he said, "you are a white woman. This town, it has stopped hunting you, but it will not embrace you. Not with me. You will be an outcast. They will call your son a half-breed." "I know," she said, her voice catching. "I have been an outcast my whole life. Yiska, I am not afraid of it, but I am afraid of being alone again." Yiska put his knife down. He looked at his hands, scarred and strong. He thought of his mother, of his father, of the long, hard path that had led him to this step. "I cannot promise you a safe life, Ada," he said, his voice raw and honest. "I cannot promise that the world will be kind. I cannot promise that the soldiers will always be fair, or that the town will ever forget. The world, it will turn. The wind will change." He turned and looked at her. "I cannot promise that the world will leave us alone. I can only promise that when the wind changes, I will be here. I will be beside you. If you want me." Ada closed her eyes. The tears she had held back for so long, for her son, for her life, finally came. She did not sob. They just ran, warm, down her cheeks. She turned and looked up at him. I do not need a promise about the world. Yiska, she whispered. It has never been my friend. I need a promise about you. He reached out. He did not touch her face. He just held his hand open, palm up, in the space between them. She looked at his hand, the hand that had fought for her, the hand that had held her son, the hand that had let go of his past. She placed her own hand in his. Their fingers laced together, strong, calloused, and sure. They did not speak again. They just sat, two outcasts, a warrior and a widow, holding hands on the porch of a broken-down ranch, and watched the last of the sun disappear, together. The world did not change overnight, but it did change. The death of Logan Pike left a vacuum, and into that vacuum, something other than fear began, slowly, to grow. The first few weeks were hard. Yiska, his side healing slowly, worked with Little Bear and a few others. Tom Hartley came out, not with warnings, but with a wagon full of new-cut lumber and a box of nails. A gift from the town, he had said, though Yiska knew it was from him. They rebuilt the roof, solid and strong this time. They mended the fences. Ada, with a new energy, a new light in her eyes, cleared the debris from her garden and planted winter vegetables. The black X on the barn was covered with fresh whitewash, a clean, bright square against the old, weathered wood. Summer came, painting the hills in a flush of green from the heavy rains, and with the summer, the Comanche came, not as warriors, but as families, following the new truce. The chief, his wisdom having overcome his pride, led his people to make their camp near the headwaters of the creek, the one that flowed from Ada's spring. A new economy was born. The Comanche horses, tended by Yiska, grew strong on Ada's pasturage. In return, Hawk and Little Bear, now Yiska's firm allies, brought fresh venison to Ada's door. The Comanche women, their initial suspicion of Ada softening, came to trade. They traded cured hides for her flour, intricate beadwork for her metal needles. Ada learned their words for water and good, and they learned hers for bread and Jamie. And then a new man rode into town. He came not on a war horse, but on a tired-looking mule, and he carried a satchel of books instead of a rifle. His name was Arthur Sloane. He was a young pastor from the East, sent to replace the old one who had, in the wake of Pike's accident, suddenly felt a calling to move further west. Arthur Sloane was a different kind of man. He was thin, wore spectacles, and looked at the dusty, violent town not with judgment, but with a deep, weary compassion. His first sermon was not about hellfire. It was about the prodigal son. He came out to the ranch. Yiska, seeing him approach, met him at the gate, his hand resting on his knife. Ada stood on the porch, her arms crossed, her face guarded. Arthur Sloane just smiled, a gentle, nervous smile. He looked at the mended fence, at the clean cabin, at the small boy who peeked from behind Ada's skirt. "Mistress McKenna," he said, taking off his hat. "Mr. Yiska, my name is Arthur Sloane. I have come to start a school." Ada just stared. "In town," he hurried on. "In the church, for any child who wishes to learn, to read, to write." He looked at Jamie. "He is welcome." Then he looked at Yiska, his gaze steady. "And the children from your people's camp, they are welcome, too. All are welcome. There is no color in learning." Yiska and Ada looked at each other. This was a new thing, a new kind of white man. "They will not sit together," Yiska said, his voice flat. "They will," Arthur said, his voice quiet but firm. "Or I will not teach. That is my only rule." The school started with 3 white children, including Tom Hartley's younger brother, and 2 Comanche children, whom the chief had sent as a test, and Jamie. In the small, stuffy church, they sat, a puzzle of red and white, and learned their letters. Arthur Sloane did not judge Yiska and Ada. He did not ask about their past. He accepted them as part of the land. like the hills and the creek. He took supper with them one night, sharing their meal of roasted venison and cornbread, and he spoke of books and the stars. His presence, his simple, unshakable decency, began to calm the town. One evening, Ada turned to Yiska. They were sitting on the porch, watching Jamie sleep inside. "I want to go to the church," she said. Yiska stiffened. "Why, he has not hurt you?" "No, not for that." She looked down at her hands. "In the eyes of your people, you have chosen me, but in the eyes of my people, I am still his widow, or your—" She flushed. "Your woman. I want the town to know, I want the law to know, that I am your wife." He looked at her, understanding. It was a shield, a piece of paper that would give her a standing. It would make Jamie, in their world, legitimate. "It is a white man's piece of paper," he said, his voice rough. "I know," she said, "but I live in their world, Yiska, and so does my son. It is a shield, for us, for him." He nodded. "Then we will do this." They went the next day. It was not a wedding. There was no white dress, no flowers. Ada wore her best calico, and Yiska wore a clean hide shirt. Tom Hartley stood as their witness. In the small, empty church, Arthur Sloane read from his book. He looked at them, his eyes kind. "Do you, Ada McKenna, take this man, Yiska, to be your husband, to walk beside him, in good times and in bad?" "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And do you, Yiska," he paused, "do you take this woman, Ada, to be your wife?" "I do," Yiska said. It was done, a simple, legal fact. They signed the paper. Yiska made his mark, a swift, strong X, and Ada wrote her name beside it. The town had its answer. But that night, it was Yiska's turn. He led her to the creek, to the new Comanche camp. The chief was there. Kills with a Knife was there. Hawk and Little Bear. The whole of his people. They sat around a great bright fire. The chief stood. He did not look at Ada with contempt now. He looked at her with respect. "Our brother, Yiska," the chief said in his tongue, and Arthur Sloane, who had come, translated quietly for Ada, "was cast out. He followed a path we did not understand. He fought a battle we were not brave enough to fight. He did not win with arrows. He won with his heart. He saved this woman, and in doing so, he saved the water for the people. He is our brother again." He held up two things. One was a necklace of blue stones and eagle claws, a warrior's necklace. He placed it over Yiska's head. The other was a simple, beautifully woven blanket, red and blue. "He has chosen to walk beside this woman. We honor his choice." He draped the blanket around Ada's shoulders. It was heavy and warm, and it smelled of clean smoke. It was a sign. She was not one of them, but she was protected. She was the wife of their warrior. They were not asked to say words. They were just asked to stand, together, in the firelight, while the drummer played a slow, steady, heartbeat rhythm. They were bound, in the white world, and in the red. Life found its own rhythm. The ranch was no longer a place of fear. It was a crossroads. In the mornings, Ada would be in the cabin, her hand over Jamie's, guiding his fingers as he learned to write his name, Jamie. In the afternoons, Yiska would be in the yard with the boy. He had made him a small, perfect bow. He stood behind Jamie, his large, dark hand covering the boy's small, pale one, showing him how to draw the string, how to be still, how to breathe before he let the arrow fly. Often, 2 or 3 Comanche children would be there, watching, soon. They were all playing, a tumbling, laughing mix of brown skin and white, their shouts echoing in the clear air. The suppers were a new thing. Ada would have her pot of beans and her cornbread, and Yiska would have a rabbit or a prairie chicken, spitted and roasted over an open fire, The Comanche way. They would sit at the table, the three of them, and they would share, a harmony of smoke and salt. The town did not forget. It never would. When Ada and Yiska rode in for supplies, they still felt the eyes. They heard the whispers. The widow and her Indian. That poor child. What will he become? But other things happened. 2. Judd Morrison, his face nervous, gave Yiska a fair price for his furs. Good pelts, he muttered, not meeting his eyes. Tom Hartley would wave, a big honest greeting from across the street, and sometimes another woman, a rancher's wife, would give Ada a short, shy nod. It was not friendship, but it was not hate. It was a start. One night, Yiska sat on the porch, watching the stars. Jamie came out in his nightshirt. He sat beside Yiska, leaning his small, warm body against him. "Yiska," the boy said. "I am here." At the school, a boy. He called me a half-breed. He said I was not white. And Hawk, he says I am not Comanche. He looked up at Yiska, his small face full of a pain that was older than his years. Will they ever stop hating us? Yiska, will people stop being mean? Yiska was silent for a long time. He looked at the vast, dark sky. He thought of his father. He thought of Pike. He thought of the long, hard road. He put his arm around the boy. "No," he said, his voice quiet. "Some will not. Some people, their hearts are small. They are afraid of what is different." Jamie's face fell. "But listen to me, little warrior," Yiska said, turning the boy to face him. "It does not matter what they call you. Half-breed, savage, poison widow. Those are their words. They are weak words. They are chains they try to put on you. But you are not what they call you. You are what you are." He tapped the boy's chest. "You are Jamie. You are brave. You are kind. You have your mother's heart. You have my strength. That is who you are. And that is what matters. That we know who we are, not what they say." Jamie looked at him, the confusion clearing, replaced by a simple, profound understanding. He nodded. "I am Jamie," he said. He leaned back against Yiska, content. "Good." The last light of the prairie faded. The high desert was quiet. Yiska, Ada, and Jamie were riding. Yiska on his black stallion, Ada on a strong mare, and Jamie on a small, spotted pony that Yiska had tamed for him. They rode not for duty, not in fear, but for the simple joy of it. They raced the sunset, their laughter carried on the wind. And high above them, so high he was just a speck, an eagle circled. It was not a warning. It was not a test. It was just watching, a blessing, on the wind. That night, the cabin was quiet. Jamie was sound asleep, the peace of the open air on his face. Ada and Yiska sat on the porch. The air was cool, fragrant with cedar. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He leaned his head against hers. They fit. He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. It was a comfortable, familiar weight. "The wind has changed," she whispered. "It will change again," he said. "I know." She turned her face, looking up at him. "But you are here." He looked down at her. Her face, in the starlight, was no longer the pale, haunted mask he had first seen. It was strong. It was beautiful. It was home. He lowered his head. She met him halfway. The kiss was not the desperate, fiery, searching kiss of their first night. It was not the kiss of two survivors, frantic for comfort. It was a kiss of knowing. It was slow and deep and sure. It was a kiss of peace, a kiss that tasted of wood smoke and cornbread and the future. It was the kiss of a man and a woman who had fought the entire world and had won. Not a victory, but a home. They just sat, holding each other, listening to the breathing of the land. So the young Comanche rode into town for grain. He came with the ghosts of his father and the hunger of his people. He came looking for survival. And he left with a widow named Ada, a small boy, a patch of land, and a future he could never have dreamed of. He had left his old life behind, and in doing so, he had found a new one. The West was still a wild, hard place. There was still blood in the dust, and tears in the wind. But even in the deepest, darkest, most violent night, a small flame of love could be lit, a single, stubborn spark, and sometimes, if it was fed by two people brave enough to protect it, it was just enough to keep the whole, wide, lonely world warm. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to connect with you. So please, comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to Wild West Tales, and be sure to like this video. And if you really want to help this story be heard, please hit that hype button. It helps more than you know.